Good evening, everybody. Today is Thursday, January 14th. Welcome to the Westwood School Committee meeting. At this point, before we get started, I just want to call this meeting to order, and we'll start with attendance. Tony Mullen?
Here.
Maya Plotkin?
Here.
Charlie Donahue? We know Charlie's not here yet. Maya Plotkin?
Here again.
Did I already say Maya? Sorry. Oh, Lord, this is not a good start. Good, just checking to make sure you're still here. Amanda Phillips?
Here.
Okay. All right. Glad everybody's here. Before we get going, first off, let's recognize, as we always do, that this is a live broadcast, that this on-stream is available through Westwood Media Center. It's also available online. This is to provide real-time public access to our activities as a school committee in accordance with the March 12th, 2020 executive order of Governor Baker. Okay, I think that Charlie has arrived. Charlie, you there?
Yes.
Okay,
You hear me?
great.
Yep.
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Thanks, Charlie. Welcome.
Yep.
So, listen, before we get going with the superintendent's report, you know, I know that throughout the years, the school committee, we thank various parties for various things. We're always appreciative of all the hard work that our administration, our teachers, all the teams, their work is so important because, of course, our greatest commodity, our greatest asset is our children, and we appreciate all the work that they've done over the years. But we all know this year is unlike any other, and I have never seen people working so hard to keep our kids in school. And I really think this is the best time. It's so important that we as a school committee really extend our thanks, our gratitude to all the parties involved who have collectively formed this team. These people are working like crazy. I have never in the 10 years that I've been on school committee seen people put in so many hours. The calls at night, everybody seems to be on 24/7. And what this team is doing is working. There are districts out there who can't even get their kids into buildings at this point. And we have this hybrid program, and I'm not going to lie, I am amazed that we have 1 week left of the semester and we're still in school. So who do we thank for that? We start with the teachers. Unbelievable job. We appreciate everything that you're doing. If you're hearing this right now, I want you to know that. I want you to know that we continue to listen to you. We continue to remain concerned and ensure that your health is a top priority. We appreciate all the hard work you're putting into, teaching kids both online and in person. I bet when you were training to be a teacher, that was not something you expected. We understand how difficult it is, and we thank you for all that you're doing to keep our kids educated, to keep them in the schools. And of course, without you, we couldn't do this. The administration, the principals, I know you guys are on the phone constantly. I know your day never ends at 5 or 6 o'clock. I know it goes well beyond that. And same is true with the central office. There's constant communication. Everybody is working so hard. We're putting our collective heads together to ensure, again, that our kids are getting the best possible education in these extraordinary and difficult times. So thanks to those folks as well. To the COVID team, all right? We have that team who's out there. They're getting calls from parents. They're doing contact tracing. They are on 24/7. Thanks to them. Our operations team, Ken, unbelievable job. We have power outages in all of this, and you have to deal with that kind of stuff right now. We don't need that, but thank God we have you and your team, because without you, we wouldn't be able to get through. The public health folks in our town have been incredible as part of this team. We are constantly in contact with them. Jared Orsini and Margaret Sullivan are really working hard to ensure that the contact tracing is done, that people are quarantining, and that we're all doing our part to ensure that our teachers and kids remain healthy. I don't want to leave anyone out, but I think the last group that I'll mention, and if I left anyone else out, I apologize, but the COVID advisory team that we have, this group of doctors, talk about docs being on call. This is another group that has been on call regularly for us. We've had issues just this week. We've had to speak with them with the issues that have occurred in grade 6. Last night, we had the outbreak that we had to address in the high school. And so we appreciate all the time and attention that they've provided to us, again, to ensure the health and safety of our kids, of our community, and to help us keep this hybrid program working. We don't want them to keep the COVID going. So that's a long-winded way to say thank you, but I think it's necessary. I want everybody to understand those. I want the community to understand just how hard people are working to keep us where we are right now. So I'll shut up now, but and we'll move on to Emily's report. But I just thought it was important, and I hope my fellow school committee members are okay with my long-winded message.
Great.
Okay, so I'll turn it over to Emily, and you can start off with your superintendent's report.
Great. Thanks, Carol. Thanks for those words. Sure. Hello, everybody. So I want to start off with some exciting news. So this Monday, January 18th, the Westwood METCO program is sponsoring a virtual community event in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. It goes from 1 to 3 p.m. We are going to be joined by a speaker, Michael Curry, who among many accomplishments and roles is a member of the NAACP's National Board of Directors. He is going to be offering us a talk reflecting on MLK's legacy and issues of race and racism. And following the talk, all of us participants will go into breakout groups to reflect on his remarks and, to specifically think about implications for Westwood, to think about our agency as individuals and as a community. So I think this is going to be a really exciting opportunity to learn together and to talk together. I'm looking forward to it. I know Carol's going to be there. I think some other folks here. I want to emphasize that everyone is welcome. It's a community event, so the schools are sponsoring it, but folks outside the schools in the Westwood community are welcome to participate. But participants are asked to RSVP. So if you go to our district website, you'll be able to find the link, and you can RSVP, and at that point, the Zoom information will be sent to you. Specifically, I want to thank Latifa Frank, who is the METCO director in the Westwood Public Schools, and also Allison Forchers, because they are really the folks who are working to make this event possible, and I appreciate it. So mark your calendars, and I hope people will join us for that. Okay, so moving on to some COVID-19 updates. So, I'll state the obvious. We're in a challenging period here as the cases of COVID-19 have surged in Massachusetts and in Westwood. And I think you're probably familiar with the numbers. The state report, though, actually just came out a couple of hours ago. So just one second, I'm getting my screen up and running here. Oops, I'm too far in here. Okay, so just quickly, we don't need to look at this in detail, but clearly you can see here, this is a graph that just shows the COVID case counts in Westwood, starting back in August and then to the present. And, the arc of the graph is clear. And in particular, we really were seeing an upsurge here starting after the vacation, and then the most recent report this week, there's really been this tremendous spike in town. The percent positivity, which we've been tracking, for a long time, it was kind of hovering in this 1.5% range, and then it started to go up until this week when we've exceeded a 6% positivity rate in Westwood. So, you know, that's sort of like the overall context for us here in Westwood. And I put this up here only to say that the increase in numbers, you know, it has implications for individuals' health, but it also has implications for us operationally here as a district. You know, as you are all aware, one of our key mitigation strategies, in addition to the things that we always have in place, like mask wearing and maintaining physical distance, has to do with cohorting students, and when there is a positive case, partnering with public health and using our COVID team to quickly contact, trace, and quarantine those close contacts. And I know Tony might be speaking to this later during his liaison report, but when we met with our COVID medical advisory team, they provided us feedback that they really think the district's doing a very good job with that process of contact tracing and quarantining and isolating positive cases. And you know, they've communicated to us that they think that's a very important strategy. So here's where we are at this point. And this is just following up on the data that we have been providing each month to you. So since September 14th, which is when students returned, 913 students have been supported by the COVID team and have been absent from in-person instruction for some reason. And I just put the prior months here so you can see, you know, this is a cumulative number, right? So month by month, it's been going up, and there's clearly been a jump here recently. The good news is that of those 913, 810 students have been cleared to return to in-person learning. So they've kind of gone through this cycle and are back. At the moment, as of today, right now, we have 103 students who are currently learning remotely due to because they're quarantined, either due to travel, although that's a very small number at this point, or being a close contact, or because they are ill. So that number obviously is quite a bit higher than we've reported in the past. And that, you know, that's presenting some challenges. To date, there have been 89 positive student cases identified in Westwood, and as of today, we have 28 active cases in the district. And again, you can see how those numbers have changed. These are cumulative numbers since we've been reporting to you throughout the fall. You know, this is a very big jump here from 26 to 89 since our school committee meeting on December 10th. And so this is just a pie chart that shows that, right, that the vast majority actually of our cases for the year have been just since our last meeting on December 10th. You know, we closely look at our data. This is just a quick snapshot that shows you how those positive cases have been distributed across grades. And then this is a look at our current positive cases. And I think you see some of the things that, you know, probably aren't surprising given some of the action steps that we've taken recently. In terms of staff, I think actually things are in some ways a little bit better. So staff has been here since August 31st. 237 staff members have been supported by the COVID team and have been absent from in-person work. Often when they are absent from in-person work, they're still working remotely. Some teachers, for instance, are teaching from home and they remote into the classroom. That's not always possible. 219 staff members have been cleared to return to in-person work. So we currently have 16 staff members who are absent or working remotely because they're quarantined as a close contact or illness. We don't have anybody who's quarantined due to travel. And there have been 27 positive staff cases identified to date. And as of this moment, we have only 2 active cases in the district. The 3 members of the COVID team have consulted with 388 parents and staff since the end of August to answer just a myriad of questions. And we want to again thank Karen Parita, Matt Gillis, and Paul Lilla for their work. We are now actually adding another person to that contact tracing team. That's John Marie Shu, who is the nurse at Martha Jones. She's joining the team, and the bottom line is that, quite honestly, in the last couple of weeks, it's been very hard to keep up with the numbers that we've been dealing with. The contact tracing has just been, there's been a whole lot of it. And so this week we needed to add another nurse to our COVID team on a part-time basis. Basically, we do a lot of this work on nights and weekends, and frankly, we just need more manpower at this point. The public health department has been really great about partnering with us, but as you can see from the number of cases in Westwood right now, they also are finding contact tracing to be very, very overwhelming right now. My understanding is that they also are looking to add some additional manpower there. I just thought I would share this data with you as well. So we are carefully looking at attendance, and so this is just it's just really a snapshot of our attendance from this past Tuesday. And I asked my assistant John to look at the percentage of in-person students who attended virtually. So, if we think here are all the people that, according to the schedule, we expected to attend in person, what actually happened. And you can see that those percentages, these are high percentages compared to what would be a typical day. And, what principals are reporting is that parents are choosing to keep their kids at home and have them Zoom into classrooms, even on some days that they were scheduled to be in person. What they're articulating is that they're being cautious, is what they say, that they're concerned about the numbers that they're seeing right now, and they're sort of making this decision on their own. And so I say this, I'm not questioning whether or not it's a good or a bad decision. I would just say that we are finding this to be sort of an interesting and challenging situation. It's like people are kind of a la carting from day to day, whether or not they are going to participate in the in-person model. And so that's just something that we're kind of talking about, because it is presenting some challenges when you kind of don't know what's happening in the class at a given moment. This number at Thurston was pretty high on Tuesday, and it does exclude 6 Blue, who, as you know, we sent remote. And so I think there just were many parents who chose to keep their kids home. So we'll just be looking at that over time. Yes, Carol.
Just a quick question, just so that we have a clear understanding. When you say, just so we get it, when you say it presents some challenges, when a family decides, you know what, we're just going to pivot ourselves and go remote, can you explain what that challenge is?
Yeah.
Or can you give us an example of?
Yeah.
Because I think most parents think that, well, what's the difference? My kid is either sitting in the classroom or my kid is sitting at his or her desk.
Right. Yeah, I see what you mean. Well, I mean, I think that for teachers instructionally, they're planning for a week, right? They plan sort of in chunks of time, and there are certain objectives that they have. And when you create a lesson plan, you may make decisions about how you're going to interact with the kid that day, or sort of what you're going to put in front of them, whether they're going to be in person or home that day. You might decide to base your intervention groups on who's going to be physically present, versus who's going to be home, right? So they're making choices based on an assumption of when they're going to see kids in person and not. And so I think that sort of throws a monkey wrench into the planning process, basically. Other things that people have shared with me, that sometimes it ends up in a particular classroom tipping the percentage of kids who are home over what's actually in the room, which they are saying is kind of an odd dynamic, that they end up teaching to more people on the screen than they have in front of them. And, just in terms of, we have to do record keeping, right? So we're trying to keep track of everybody's status and correctly, code who's doing what. So that kind of stuff is just operationally challenging us well.
Okay, so a similar question, and then I'll let you continue.
Yeah.
You mentioned too that at times it's a challenge too for the teachers that have to be out, whether they're quarantining or they're actually sick. Can you just speak briefly to how that presents, what the challenges are to have a teacher suddenly go remote, just so that there's an understanding of that.
When a teacher goes remote, well,
Right. Why it's not always possible for a teacher to go remote really is.
yeah. So we've had some situations. I'm not sure. I hope I'm answering the question you're asking. So we've had some situations where maybe the teacher is a close contact and needs to go remote, right? So from an operational perspective, the teacher then is teaching from their house. The kids may be in person with the teacher's face, big face on the screen. And I have to say, we've seen it done successfully in some places. I saw a video from a 3rd grade recently, and it was kind of a thing to behold. But we have to have an adult physically in the room with the kids, right? And so that's the kind of staffing challenge. We now say, well, who's going to be in the room? And we're not using daily substitutes this year, and we have a permanent building sub in each building, but that covers one class, right? So we don't have people to pull into the room to cover that.
Right.
So I would say that's challenging. And obviously the remote in to the in-person kids is more effective, I would say, with older kids than with younger kids, where that's particularly challenging. Does that answer? Is that what you're asking?
It does. It
Okay.
does. Thank you.
Okay. Sure.
Emily, I have a question.
Yeah.
I know that you asked the parents in the district to make a decision if they were going to change from hybrid to fully remote or vice versa by a certain date. I can't remember the deadline. Are you seeing more people move from hybrid to remote, or are the numbers staying the same?
Yeah. So the deadline was Monday. So we're still chasing people down for the particular. Well, I just closed the survey for the people who want to go remote, so that's now shut down, and that's at, as I recall, I think it's 68 people who have asked to switch to fully remote.
So that's in addition to who already is fully remote.
Right. But then there are people coming back. And so that number isn't firm yet. But I would say of the people who are currently fully remote, it looks like it's settling at about 15% of those people are looking to come back. So it will be more people going out than coming back.
Okay.
Net. But, there is coming and going. One other thing that I'll just mention about this phenomenon is that we've had high school kids and a couple of high school parents express that that it's disappointing when they come to school, because they're coming to school to see their friends and their teachers, and then they get there and they arrive and fewer than half their cohort has attended, which is sort of diminishing the point, right? That we want people to have this in-person interaction. So.
But in theory, I guess I have a couple thoughts. In theory, this may be, how do I say it? This may be the right behavior, right? In other words, if, somebody may be potentially, in the sense that people may be doing the right thing safely, which I think is right. And I think it also is a point in time, right? So if those charts that you just shared start to go the other way, I would, hopefully, which they are at the state level starting to plateau. If those start to improve and continue, hopefully improve in the next month, I would think these numbers would improve as well. Is that fair?
That's what I think too. I'm assuming that this is a temporary phenomenon that's related to something that's happened, and that's what we assume.
Yeah, right.
And yes, I do not in any way want to suggest that people who are choosing to participate virtually because they're feeling ill or should be soldiering on and coming in. Definitely not. But I would say, so right after the vacation, I know between the high school and the middle school, we had 85 parents call or email to say, I'm keeping my kid home just because we're nervous, right? So I shared this to say we're keeping an eye on it, but it is also my assumption that at some point that would stabilize, I would think. I also just wanted, I'm going to sort of loop back here. The other number that we're really thinking about, the quarantine number, 103 kids in quarantine. So, mean, it's a lot of kids in quarantine. And, you know, I want to be honest to say that in the contact tracing process right now, the fact that we are maintaining 6 feet of physical distance is what is keeping that number low. So, you know, if we were at 3 feet, then when in the contact tracing process for every kid that's positive, there would be a number of people who would be designated close contacts and would then have to quarantine. And so I think that we would see, you know, at the high school, that could be 4 or 5 kids, you know, per class, per block. And so I think that quarantine number could go up quickly under different circumstances. And at some point you effectively are going remote if you've got, you know, enough people in quarantine. So anyway, hopefully this number will start to come down also. I mean, we're all really hoping that things start to trend in the right.
And how many, do you have a sense ballpark, how many of those are sports related or outside activity related?
That's a good question. I mean, a good portion of them. So I don't know from this week, because I didn't look at it broken down this week, but last week before we met with the code advisory team, my recollection is that it was, I mean, I think it was almost half and half that, you know, that we've, I mean, at this point, I've lost track. I mean, we've had maybe 6 or 7 youth sports teams quarantine. Yeah. So
that's probably right. 6 times 8, probably 50 people.
Right. Yeah, I think so.
A quick question about the students in quarantine. So I think it was the last meeting we talked about how it was particularly challenging for K-3 students who can't remote in. Is that still the case, or is there some sort of like process in place for those students? What's happening there?
We have a plan, and I see Allison hopefully can be articulate about the plan more so than I can. Been working on it.
Yeah, so we've got a couple things happening. One is we're trying to work out, we're basically trying to work out ways that there can be touch points for those students with their teacher, with their class, that don't sort of functionally undermine our shift to get back to in-person as the basic model. And some of the things we're talking about involve, like, you know, having students join morning meeting, or having students have sort of participation points. Teachers are providing information and work for students and assignments and links and things for home. And then I think the most exciting development is we've actually started interviewing for a remote learning coach, an individual whose job is essentially going to be to kind of work with this group of students to basically be a connector between school and home. And we should be wrapping up that process early next week and hope to have somebody in place in, you know, I think about 10 days or fewer if we can pull it off. So we've got a really good candidate pool that we're working with, and we're excited actually.
Great. So any other questions about the data? Okay, stop sharing. Okay, so just related to this then, the phase metrics. So, you know, at the November meeting, the school committee established some metrics for contemplating changes to learning model. And at last month's meeting, we looked at the metrics for February 1st change and determined that we'd stay in hybrid. So we're coming up on the benchmark date tomorrow to look at those same metrics for March 1st. You know, the Westwood and the state metrics have gotten worse since our December meeting. So I'm assuming that based on that articulation, that we're not planning a change for March 1st, but I just wanted to say that out loud and see if there's any other thinking on that. Sounds like there isn't. Okay. So that's my assumption. We also established metrics for moving to fully remote. And, as you know, we have started to get correspondence from people who are asking now, when are you going to change to fully remote? What would be the trigger and the metrics to go in that direction? I've been sharing the document that school committee posted with people, but also saying that really, the expectation is that to the maximum extent possible that we're we are going to keep going with in-person learning and employ the kinds of strategies that we've done a couple times recently. And this is kind of what you had suggested in the metrics, that that we carefully monitor our data. We take kind of a surgical approach, right? Like we made one team go remote instead of having the whole middle school go remote. That was harder at the high school just because kids in different grades have different classes together. But in the case of the high school, we just had one cohort go remote where we thought that was where we were seeing something that was concerning. And so, you know, my intention is to keep employing those strategies as long as that seems to be working. So that's, I think, where we are right now.
I think that makes sense. I was just gonna, I think that makes sense. And we're operating, you know, in conjunction with our medical team. I mean, they are advising us along the way, and we have, so those surgical strikes that we've made, it's not something that we just decide to do without performing due diligence and without consulting the experts, right? I just think it's important to add that. So.
Yes. So related to this, I just wanted to circle back to a conversation from last month, because last month I told the committee that we would think seriously about the possibility of making changes to the remote Wednesday. So I want to tell you sort of where I've landed on that. You know, I clearly understand people's desire for more in-person learning time. We've talked about that. And I do want you to know that I did think about this a lot. We've talked a lot about it internally, and I've communicated with some colleagues in other districts to say, here's my thinking, what's your thinking, you know, just to cross-check. And while I think that making a change for Wednesday at some point, particularly in some grades, may be an important step, the conclusion that I've come to is that right now, I just need to ask for the committee's support in hanging tight with our current schedule for a bit. I'll tell you that the COVID team has unsolicited and repeatedly expressed to me how important that remote Wednesday is for them in terms of the contact tracing process. It's interesting when you do the 48-hour look back, when you throw that Wednesday in, it really does kind of make things easier to sort through. And given where we are right now with contact tracing, where, I mean, it's never over. It's all the time. I just don't think I can make that change for them. I also just want to tell you that teachers report that they are finding the ability to have the entire cohort together at once on a Wednesday, albeit remotely, once a week, to be really helpful to them instructionally, that is an important part of how they're thinking about the week. And, you know, I have to take their word for it when they tell me that's an important part of what they're doing. I have also been surprised at how many teachers have expressed how different they find it to teach class on Wednesday when they're not wearing a mask and none of the kids are wearing a mask and everybody can see each other, and they're all together, albeit on a screen. So, you know, that's what they are saying. At a pragmatic level, many of our teachers do have their own children at home on Wednesdays. So if we made a switch, we would have to work with people, you know, it would impact our workforce, and we would have to do that. In the big picture of this year's schedule, the remote Wednesdays are when we're doing PD and having team meetings and faculty meetings and department meetings, and we would need to keep those structures in place, which would mean that an in-person Wednesday would effectively be a half day. And when I look at the schedules that we're running now at the schools, it would take some doing to try to figure out the transportation logistics. So there's just a lot of things. And I guess I would just say that bottom line, as I've really been thinking about what is the work right now, I think that between now and February vacation, I mean, one, we got to keep going. We've got to keep functioning operationally. But I have to get the FY22 budget developed. We're behind where we usually are in that process, and it's a lot more complicated this year. So I've got to get the budget developed. We are starting to talk about how are we going to figure out the logistics of vaccinating people. We hope in the next couple of months. And we're going to talk tonight, but I'm assuming that the committee is going to want me to start pursuing a testing program for students. And we would be working on the state's timeline. So that would be immediate work. And so I guess I'm feeling very strongly that we need to focus our energy right now on these forward-thinking things, at least for the next few weeks, because I think that those things are ultimately the path forward to really bringing everybody back. So I say this out loud tonight, knowing that I'm sure there will be many people who will be frustrated with me to hear that. I'm sure that will be articulated, but I just feel like I have a responsibility to tell you what I think is best for the organization right now.
So I just have, so I'm trying to understand, it sounds like there's two factors, right? The first factor is, can we do this right now?
Mm-hmm.
And the second factor is, or the second question is, should we do this at all?
Yeah.
And it seems to me that the can we do this right now question is clearly no, right? Mm-hmm. It sounds like that there's just too many other things that you need to focus on. But I think the more important question that I'm really trying to understand is should we do this at all? Mm-hmm. And just based on some of the things you were saying, it sounds like your recommendation, I know you're saying, let's look at this later, yeah. But then some of the factors that you mentioned, it made it seem like even if we looked at this later, you would still say, I don't think this is a good idea. And that's what I'm trying to understand, yeah. Just to manage expectations. I mean, is that...
Yeah. I have to say, I'm telling you, this is what I'm hearing when I talk to teachers, right? I would not say that at this point we did like a full exploration of the pros and cons with teachers. So, and so I would want to have that conversation, So I have to say that, like, should we do it at all? I don't know that I've answered that question. I think I am saying that to your first point, like, can we do it right now? I don't think that is where the priority for us is in terms of our resources and energy right now. And I understand all the reasons that people want it. I really do. It also, when we decided to go 4 days with grades 2 and 3, which I absolutely think was the right thing to do, it created other issues, right? So look at now we have this issue of, well, now you can't just Zoom in for 2 and 3 when you're quarantining. So I just say that to say that every time we make one decision, it results in other challenges, right? And so I just haven't had time to sort through all of those things, like the transportation. So it would take more thought. And yeah, so I hear what you're saying. You don't want me to string people along if it's never going to happen, I think is what you're saying, right?
Yeah,
and that's not my intention. I have not shut it. I have not closed the door on this question forever.
Okay, because I do think it, I know I said last month that this is something that we really should look into. Mm-hmm. And I understand that there are so many things going on that we really should look into. Mm-hmm. But I do think that this is something that parents have asked for, that, and, I just think that if we are going to say this is just not something that the district's interested in, mm-hmm. I would like a lot more of an explanation for why. Mm-hmm. I just think it's that important an issue.
Yeah. So. I mean, it is not my style to not say what I mean, right? So if I meant I'm never going to revisit Wednesdays, then I would tell you that. That isn't what I mean. But I am giving you my honest assessment of where I think we are right now.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm a little bit with Maya's, but I'd like to add, I think part of this challenge people are having mm-hmm. is there's no plan. And so I think continuing to push and push, and then I just don't want people to feel like we're making this. I know we are making it up a little bit as it goes, which is fine. And I acknowledge that we're all making it up. But I just think a revisiting of this in a time when we would revisit even just the Wednesday issue would be helpful, for me at least. Mm-hmm. And I guess I say again what I said earlier, like, I'm not sure why some of the arguments you made may be true in the middle and high school, but they seem to be more, they don't hold true as much where you already have kids 4 days a week already. Mm-hmm. So, right. So saying I already see my 4 kids there, I get, they already have the class together, for example. Yeah. So yeah. I guess I'm just I think where I'm a little challenged is, I know it's all very fluid, is understanding when we would revisit this and when in the context of everything else.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I outlined that we've got to get the budget developed. That's going to be done before the February break, right? I mean, that is a very big priority right now for us. And I'm hoping there'll be more information about the vaccination, and we'll talk about testing tonight. And I think when I know where we're going with that, I'll have a better idea of how we're going to apportion our time and our resources. So, I think certainly coming back, we could revisit it again at the end of February when those things are maybe out of the way. I hear you. I mean, I agree with you. It's a different proposition at K-3, right? I mean, clearly, in terms of the Wednesdays. The Wednesdays right now are, they're serving as this interesting relief valve in the district right now. And I guess I would just communicate to you that the level of worry and anxiety right now is really high. And it's a day that teachers experience differently right now. I don't think it's a great time to have the conversation with them about this issue.
Can I ask another question on Wednesdays?
Yep.
So the high school made a change to the schedule that I think back a month ago that I think at least academically made a lot of sense, of having longer blocks every other week. The middle school has continued under what I think is my view, a flawed model of very short 20-minute periods. Has there been any thought to look at what's going on in the middle school in those blocks?
I can certainly talk to Mr. Redmond about it. I don't want to make it up here on the spot. I think it has something to do with the way that they schedule team meetings in special ed. I don't know, but let me look into that more.
Okay.
So are you suggesting that you think it would be better to have fewer longer, or just longer?
Look, yeah, I mean, they have 6 blocks that are very, very short because they don't start till 9:50 and they end very early. And then I'm hearing of just some, oftentimes, often there's just very little it can be. I mean, you don't need to be an expert to know that you can't cover much in those periods. So I'm just curious why the high school went to, I think, a probably different model, but not the middle school.
Yeah. I don't know. I know that the high school they surveyed students, they surveyed staff. That was an internal process they went through and they revised as a result. I can look into it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think that it's a very late start, and they seem to be out fairly early at the middle school. And so I would definitely recommend looking at that as well.
But mind you, I'm very supportive for once of later start times.
Yeah, this might be a little too late.
Okay. All right, we'll think about that. Yeah, I'm sure it has something to do with how they're doing their team meetings now, and but I will look into that for you. So, okay. So, anything else on that before I move to a different?
I wanted to add, kind of echo what Mia and Tony said. I was, hopeful that we would be able to get the Wednesdays off the ground, and just, ask that if we're kind of surprised by the numbers at some point, we start trending downward, if we could revisit it sooner rather than later. If this is hopefully just a blip and, we're in better shape in a couple weeks, maybe we could talk about it again.
Okay. I will start the conversations here. And I want to emphasize, I mentioned, I think that I understand parents' perspective on this issue, and people have articulated it, and it's clear and it makes sense to me. I am balancing a lot of different things right now. And so this is sort of where I landed in my thinking on that. I want to talk for a minute about learning time, just for a second. I know that we received some correspondence from parents who are asking us what the plan is to make up hours of learning time that have been disrupted by this year's schedule and model. And I mean, the fact is that we're not creating more days. We're making up that time. And I just want to remind people that, back in August, when we developed our reopening plan, our plan had to meet DESE's time on learning standard, as we do every year, right? We have to meet a reg called time on learning. And with the exception of the fact that the commissioner shortened the number of school days required, so there was sort of a caveat there. But when we submitted our plan met that time and learning standard, and it was approved by DESE. So we've met that requirement. As you know from my update a few weeks ago, that in November, DESE took this further step and they conducted an audit of every district's synchronous learning time. And, I think honestly that they had considerable concern about districts whose hybrid model relies on students working asynchronously or working independently on remote days. And, we of course have not taken that approach in Westwood, right? And so when we went through this audit process, at that time they were auditing us, and I was confident that Westwood's model would meet whatever standard they put forth. And, the State Board of Education implemented this new synchronous learning standard. And when the accountability dashboard was launched, which I think was on New Year's Eve day, we exceeded the standard in all the grade levels that they audited. So, and somewhere in the neighborhood of a third of the districts did not. But we we did just fine on that. And, where some neighboring districts, high-performing districts, are scrambling around now to get more synchronous learning time in there, we really have made that a cornerstone of our plan. So I think we're in relatively good shape there. So I'm going to switch to budget, unless there's anything else people want to talk about here.
Can I just ask one question relating to the very beginning of your report? Regarding the MLK Day event, what students would that be best for in terms of, age appropriateness?
It's a good question. Allison, what do you think? I mean, it's going to be
it's a little on the academic side.
Yeah, you mentioned breakout rooms, so that threw me.
Yeah. I think it's Latifah's chiming in.
Latifah's for high
It sounds like
school. Okay,
she's saying
Latifah.
high school. Yeah,
that's helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it is an academic kind of experience. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So budget. So I know Lemma's going to talk a bit about where we are with the current year's budget when we get to the conversation on testing, because I think it would, relate to that. Just want to mention some things about the FY21 stimulus funding. So, there's been a lot in the news about the stimulus money coming from the federal government, and it is good news. However, we found out late last week that in Massachusetts, they're taking 90% of the stimulus money for schools and allocating it according to the Title I formula. And the Title I formula is related to the proportion of students who meet a low income threshold in a district. And so we're really not a Title I district. This is the same strategy that was used to distribute the original CARES Act money to schools. In the fall, and you may recall that Westwood received $30,000 from the CARES Act. The size of the stimulus package is bigger, and so we expect to get 3 to 4 times what we got in the first one. So that would put us at about $90,000 to $120,000. This is speculation on my part, but I think that's probably the ballpark of what we're talking about. And that's certainly a nice amount of money, but it's not, a life-changing windfall for our budget. So I think that's probably where we will be. In terms of FY22 budget update, so we really dove into that in the last few days. Cost center leaders have submitted their requests. Central office has reviewed it. We've had some meetings. We have multiple meetings next week with administrative council, so that's central office and all the building administrators, to really sift through priorities and begin making some choices. We've calculated a rough level services number, and it's in the neighborhood of $1.4 million. That would represent a 3% increase over FY21. So the approach that we're taking, this is, of course, is level services over sort of a fictional plan for FY21, because those aren't the services. Now we have many more people here now than we had budgeted for in FY21. But as we talked about before, we're kind of going back to the voted budget just to make sense of where we are. Clearly, we have some new priorities going into next year that are just related to this year's reality. So, you know, when I look at the kinds of budget requests that are coming in, there are a lot of themes. So certainly intervention is a big theme. Compensatory services, obviously something we're thinking about. Mental health supports, SEL, and also a real desire to get back to some of our strategic priorities. You know, we have not been able to be terribly strategic this year. And, you know, so we really are interested in starting to lean into some of our diversity, equity, inclusion goals and, you know, other things that we had identified. We're in the process of doing our typical enrollment analysis and class size analysis. And then I would say, you know, the strategy is that we are carefully examining the staffing cuts that we took at the high school and middle school after the voted budget as part of our plan to get through this year. So that was 5.2 FTE at the high school and 1 FTE at the middle school. And we're looking at the impact of those cuts with respect to sort of projected enrollment, which of course is starting to go down now at the high school finally, and had been going down at the middle school. And so our plan is to really see to what extent those cuts are sustainable, because if we could sustain those cuts, then that would give us opportunity to reallocate that FTE to start to address some of these different FY22 priorities within that like level services number, if you will. So we're working on that. And as I put out to you earlier, and I appreciate your flexibility here, instead of having the January 28th school committee meeting, we're going to push that to February 4th, a week later. It's just going to give us more time to do some things that we need to do to be ready for that. So we'll propose our budget on February 4th, and then we're scheduled to be in front of FinCom on February 9th. And then the regularly scheduled February 11th school committee meeting would be the public budget hearing. So that would be the timeline. And if we can stick to that, then it'll get us back on course with sort of a typical timeline for budget.
If you could just put in the timeline, enough time for pre-read, because I know the budget tends to be a pretty
Yes, well, that is frankly exactly why I've asked to bump it a week, so that we want to get the budget book out to you, you know, a week in advance, so that you can really dig into that. So I think that's it for me. I apologize, I'm way over my allotted time.
No worries. There were a lot of questions, so well-used time. Let's move on, though. Thank you, Emily, to the liaison reports. Maya, would you like to give an update on the building project?
Sure. So we had a community forum last month after this group met. I believe it was on December 15th. Yeah. And we think it went well. We showed the sort of revised design to the community, and the architects walked through what we need, you know, the changes and additions and things like that. So we got some great feedback from the community, incorporating that into the design. And right now we're really in the process, the SBC is really in the process of looking for ways to make sure we stay within the budget. We're doing some value engineering, which means basically, you know, what changes can we make to the project that would reduce costs? And we have a meeting a week from tomorrow where we're going to go through a lot of this value engineering, these ideas that we've been working on. So I absolutely encourage everyone to watch that meeting. It is early, 8 a.m. on Friday morning, but it's interesting because you'll see some of the decisions that we had to make in terms of, or that, you know, sort of working groups are recommending to the SBC to make in terms of how can we really make this a cost-effective project while still making sure it's a good-looking building and functions the way we need it to function. So that's about it. That's really where we are. We're still in the design phase. So, oh, Carol, you're muted.
Yes, I am. Thanks, Maya.
Sure.
All right. Charlie and Tony, would you like to give an update on the COVID-19 advisory group?
Yeah, I think we'll talk. I just have two quick things. We'll talk about a lot of this when we talk about testing. Just reiterating what Emily said earlier, we did spend a lot of time at our recent meeting looking at the historic data, and I think the overall consensus was that really they were impressed by the fact that there hadn't been really clusters or big outbreaks, the way that contact tracing and some of the efforts have been undertaken. So that was, I think, encouraging. The second thing, and this is a bit of a thank you and just a bit of an update for everyone. So we'd like to thank, I know Chief Deckers, Chris Coleman, Jared, our nurses, I believe. So the way the vaccinations are working in the Commonwealth is we've currently now have a phase where the first responders are getting vaccinations, and they've allowed our school nurses to be part of that phase. So I think we'd like to thank all of them because that will help us and enable the school nurses then to be part of the, hopefully the next phase of vaccinating the teachers. So I wanted to highlight that as a thank you. And, I think that's, I think the big question as you all follow the press is vaccinations. And, it's a bit of a supply and distribution challenge if you read the press. But I think the good news is at least that will help on the distribution side, and, supply will be to be determined. But that's kind of, I think, to Emily's point, well, hopefully as we get into February or March, will be kind of one of the next key focus points.
I just have a couple of comments through Tony, sorry.
That's all.
I've been trying to attend the collaborative meetings. I think I've been to 7 of them now for 2 hours each. It's an interesting group of people. And matter of fact, it just started 5 minutes ago. So I'm going to be in 2 meetings right now. So I apologize if I'm wandering back and forth here. But they've done very valuable thinking. And I think have influenced the state of Massachusetts to come forward and say, we're going to provide funding to test kids 6 times. I don't think that would have happened if the collaborative hadn't done so much work with a lot of national interest in what they've been doing. But what's come out of it for us to consider and what we could learn, and I thank Wellesley for doing a lot of work that could help us in our own decision, is that they tested all their students and teachers in October, about 3.5 months ago. They had a lot of money that helped them do it for $85 a test. But what they learned from the process is you can do it for $15 a test and maybe down to 10. Before they did their testing, they surveyed their teachers, and 5% said they would be willing to bring back to school with what they knew. After doing 18,000 tests of the 3,000 kids and teachers, the Wellesley teachers recently have said 95% are willing to go back to in-school learning. And that was a percent of the parents too, as well as all kinds of thank you and gratitude and among everybody. So there is an opportunity here to maybe be back to school sooner than a lot of towns that haven't figured this out yet. So it's a huge opportunity if we did this. So there is an opportunity for us tonight to decide to possibly begin to do testing of our students in addition to our teachers. Why do that? Well, with the report we've received of the kids and the teachers that have already been found in our system, the real challenge for the people doing the contact tracing is how do these kids get it and who do they give it to? And the big problem is 40% of the people with the COVID don't know they have it. They're healthy, they feel healthy, but they can infect other people. And that's a great value of doing this testing of asymptomatics, that the state will give us money to do at least 6 tests, and then to decide whether it's worth our while to go on after that for as much as $10 a test. But the key is you got to find people, and you need to do it constantly because you could be have no symptoms today, and in 3 days you have them. That's why you do constant testing.
Charlie, can I just interrupt you for a minute?
Yeah,
I think
please.
this is all very important, and I think that we should continue this as one of this comes under the discussion items. So,
I apologize only in that I'm going to try to be attending that other meeting too. So
I
I'm sorry
understand.
for maybe jumping the gun, but I may be over at that meeting because tonight they're doing some discussions that could be great value to us too.
Right, okay. Well, I know, I'm sorry that you have to be in two places at once. That's but we appreciate your input, but we certainly want to have a robust discussion during the discussion items, which are just coming up. So I don't know if you can hang tight a little bit, and we
I'm
could go
trying to.
right. Okay, all right. So how about if there are no other liaison reports? I'm assuming there, okay, good. We're gonna move on to the discussion items, and why don't we go right to the COVID-19 testing? And I interrupted you, but I've moved us into the discussion items, so I think we can continue. If that's all right with everyone, we'll just change the order here and continue this discussion, okay?
Great.
All right, good. All right, so COVID-19 testing. So let's continue with this, Charlie, the update on the staff testing and the student testing initiative.
So let me tell you where we are with this. So,
Okay.
you know, we've had a lot of discussions here about staff testing, and so we started a round of staff testing today, actually. So we just distributed the testing kits. We have contracted with Miramis, and that's the same company that Wellesley is using. And we've contracted with them to provide pool testing. And I know Charlie has done a lot to educate us about how that works. It's, you know, really an efficient and relatively affordable way to get to have a lot of tests conducted quickly. They run the test on the pool, and then if you know, if the whole pool is negative, then you're set. If you get a positive from the pool, then you have to go back down and break it into pairs and eventually isolate individuals using PCR tests. So we have rolled that out, and so we'll get our results over the weekend. From that, the cost to the district using Miramis is $15 per test. If the pool test is positive, then the process of narrowing down the samples, there is sort of an additional cost for the retest. When we did a pilot of this, remember we partnered to do a free pilot. About 64% of all of our staff participated. We, based on some surveying that we did, anticipate a higher percentage will participate this time. Likely not 100%, but we're hoping for more in the 75 to 80% range. So we have sort of this contract for a one-time test that we're doing this week, but I know that we had been talking about implementing a weekly testing program. So I want to tell you that we're ready to do that. We've worked out the logistics. We're ready to work with Miramis and to establish a program with them. My plan at this point would be to suggest that we plan to test staff weekly until the April vacation and just see where we are at that point. I mean, who knows where we're going to be with vaccines and whatnot by that point. So we can reassess at that point. But to do so, we would need to reallocate funds in order to cover the cost of the programming. And so Lemma, do you want to jump in here? Lemma has some has a specific suggestion for how the school committee could reallocate some things.
Yes, so I've looked at this question of reallocating funds, and we're definitely, we have some items in our budget where we've gone over, but there are some other line items where we had funds earmarked for specific purposes, and we just don't anticipate that we will be using them in that way. And specifically for this employee COVID testing initiative, we've estimated that the cost for the period described that Emily described would be $92,000. And we've been able to find that funding, in short, between our conferences and meetings lines across all of our cost centers. So pulling primarily from our central office funding, but like there's 62,000 there in conferences and meetings that we have unused and that we really don't believe that we will be calling on this year due to the degree to which travel is restricted, and a lot of these events and conferences are restricted. There's also specific travel lines, both out of state and in-state travel, So 7,000 and 15,000 in those lines respectively. And then there's a budget line for Teacher Institute. This really is used for courses that are pre-authorized for teachers. And again, a lot of these courses that would have involved travel have been canceled. So this year we have provided alternative professional development opportunities more geared to the hybrid learning model that we needed. And this specific funding, we don't anticipate we will need. So between those resources, we feel that we'll be able to identify the funding for this testing.
So that would be our plan. And so really, I have it under action item, just, you know, to ask the school committee to authorize that reallocation so that we could do that. So I will say that it's possible that we would be able to do this less expensively if we hop onto the state's testing initiative. So I can transition to talking about student testing in a second, but let me just pause and see. I know we've talked a lot about staff testing. Are there any other questions about that?
So it starts, so I know this week's a little, so it starts this week. You've got the 1 week this week, and then this will start next week if we approve it.
Yeah. If we approve it, we can get it in place next week.
Right. Thank you.
Okay.
I think it's a great idea, and I think the teachers would greatly appreciate it too,
Yeah.
as well as the parents of the kids.
I think so. Okay, so that's that piece. And then of course we've been talking about the possibility of a student testing program, and you know, we've had a lot of conversations about like what would the cost be and the logistics. And the state now has rolled something out about a week ago, big press conference with the governor, and I sent you some information. I sent you the memo that DESE sent out, and I also attended a webinar with DESE to learn more about it. So here's my understanding. So the state is offering to provide 6 weeks of free COVID testing for students, and I think staff. So I'm trying to nail that down. That's why I think we want to think about our contract, how we shape the contract with Miramis. But so it would be 6 weeks of free testing. They are referring to the districts who participate in that as the early launch. If we are interested in participating in the early launch, we have to indicate our interest to DESE by tomorrow. And I've looked at what we would have to do. So the information we'd have to submit tomorrow is, you know, no problem. I can take care of that. The way that it works is that this particular program that they have, so our staff, the staff program is a saliva-based test. You take home the kit, you know, you provide the sample, you bring it back. The state student testing program is the anterior nasal swab, not the up into your brain one, but the less invasive swab. So in their program for younger students, the district has to provide personnel that actually goes out and takes the swabs. They say that for older kids, and it sounded to me on the webinar like they were talking about high school, it can be self-serve. But some other districts talked about like at middle school during mask breaks, they have like nurses out there with the test kit cart. And so you have to provide the personnel. They did certainly give the impression that you can get to the point where you can do this pretty quickly. So obviously this would just be for families that were interested in participating. So there would be a formal process for parents to consent or to, choose not to participate in the program. It is also a pool test program. And so if we want to get in on this early launch, then we have to respond by tomorrow. After the 6 free weeks, at that point, the district could choose to continue with the student testing program, but we would have to pay for it at that point. And, at the press conference and speaking with people in DESE, a lot has been made about the line is kind of, well, you can use your federal stimulus dollars for that. And I just, I do want to be clear that the amount of federal stimulus funding that we would get would not cover this. It would be a great portion of it, right? But it would not cover the cost of the program. So we would really be thinking again about taking a look at our current budget to do that. And so we, at that point, after the free pilot, then we would be paying for the tests, the swabs, and also the accompanying, they say the accompanying testing materials, software, and whatnot. So the idea here is that the state will basically do the procurement process for districts, sort of have this statewide bid, and they intend to identify apparently a number of companies, and the districts could decide who they want to work with. So I was a little surprised that when I got on the webinar that they don't have this contract in place yet. So they say that they hope to have the contract in place, by sometime during the 6-week early launch period. So, you know, an obvious question is, what is the price point going to be? It seems like it's probably going to be pretty low. So that's very encouraging that, you know, I said the Miramis is about $15 per test, which is quite good compared to what it was a while ago. The number that I heard thrown out was that they are hoping they can get it to $5 per swab minimum, is what it said. $5 per swab minimum. And the way that the minimum part was explained was that, I mean, clearly to do a testing program, a weekly testing program for 3,000 kids requires some infrastructure, right? And that they suggested that the contract might have options to pay more to get different levels of support services from the companies, right? But we don't have any specific details about that yet. So that was interesting. So, you know, I came away thinking that clearly this is, you know, it's an exciting opportunity. I mean, 6 free weeks. The idea that they could leverage sort of the volume of a statewide bid to get the price point down considerably, I feel like also makes it, you know, worth talking about. The caveats are that they did not give any indication of what the timeline is. So we have to respond by tomorrow, but they don't have, at least they're not telling us what the dates are for the 6 free weeks. And so I'll put that in. I can certainly indicate our interest, and then, you know, I'm just hoping they're not going to say it's starting tomorrow. But on the other hand, I hope it's not April either, right? So I need to sort of get a sense of what the startup logistics are. You know, I'll be honest, we're a little gun shy because we've been down this road during this pandemic on a couple of other occasions. You know, great fanfare about the learning management systems. And, you know, the statewide bid for PPE, like we had to buy that stuff because the bid just wasn't ready. So I guess I'll put myself in the cautiously optimistic camp at this point. So, you know, if we think about this, if we assume, let's assume $5 for a second and full participation, which is unlikely, right? But if we did that, then that's $15,000 a week, 6 weeks free, but then say remaining 14 weeks. That's, I think, $210,000. And then that's just for the swab. So you know, there are other costs. I mean, you have to ship things, you have to pay for the follow-up tests. And I think that to launch a program for 3,000 weekly tests, you know, we would need someone in charge of that. So I think that we would need to think about what kind of personnel resources we would need to do that. So that is the situation. And
Can I ask a question about, I have so many questions. So, okay, let's start with the teacher testing that we'd like to start on Monday.
Yeah.
What is the time frame? I know it's pool testing, but what's the time frame from, you know, these are going to be tests that go home with them, so they bring them back on Tuesday. Is that right?
So for the staff?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's how we're doing the staff. So they ship us the tests, the kits early in the week. We have to put them together, divvy them up, and get them out to the schools. So we do that. Staff picks them up on Thursday, takes them home, and then they do their saliva sample Friday, like, before you eat, brush your teeth. And they bring it in, they drop it off by 8:45. We ship them on Friday for Saturday delivery at a lab. And then they get us the pool results by Sunday.
Okay.
And if
All
the
right.
pool, obviously if there's a positive in the pool, then you have to do further stuff, but they use the same saliva sample.
So we don't have to retest to narrow down the pool.
Right. They do that. They go from, there's 24 samples in a pool. If it pops positive, then they make it 12 pairs. They isolate a pair. And then when it gets to the pair, you actually have to get individual consent again to do the PCR, but they use the same saliva sample. So it's all there. They can just do it at the lab. So they say, once they're saying like 12 to 15 hours. I mean, it's fast. So that's that schedule. With the states, obviously I'm not totally sure, but I can tell you that what Wellesley does, and I think Watertown, is that they have staff who on their remote Wednesdays puts together the thousands of kits, because you get like the pieces.
Mm-hmm.
You got to put them together. And then they distribute them out. And, well, no, they don't distribute them out. They go out and they get the swabs, right? Somehow, in Watertown at least. Well, I guess they're using Miramis in Wellesley. So I guess they do distribute them out. Watertown's doing the swabs. But at any rate, they get the results. But what the superintendent at Wellesley told me is that they also somehow get the results timed for their remote Wednesday also, because then they use their remote Wednesday to do the contact tracing. And
So it takes a week?
follow up. Well, I think the whole cycle does. So they get the kits out, people take them home, they enter the barcodes, they bring them back, they ship them, they do the testing, right? And so it's sort of a weekly cycle is what.
And so if we have the cohorts,
Yeah.
would we be doing sort of 2 rounds per week?
So that is part of it. I would have to ask David again, but I think they ship twice a week. Like they ship one cohort on Tuesday and the other on
Friday.
Thursday. Yeah, something like that. I think that's how it works.
The test results for Miramis
Yeah.
is 24 hours, but if they get them the test today, you have a result tomorrow. How you distribute that and contact trace and all that is up to you, but they turn it around in a day from the time they receive it.
What
It's
if there's a positive test in a
The
pool?
positive test,
How
the
long does
positive,
that take?
the thing that helped with Miramis is they use the same saliva samples and they test them, and they can then narrow that down themselves within a day, and then they notify who in the pool is positive. They, through the various
Right.
procedures that they do that.
I think
So-
it's possible they quarantine the pool while they do that process though. Well,
Okay, so all 24 would be quarantined until they narrow down.
I think that's possible, but the timing for Miramis, I mean, it is quite fast. And so this is all making sense. I think they do Tuesday for Wednesday results and then Friday for Saturday results. I think that's what they're doing. In Watertown, where they're doing the swabs, I believe what the superintendent said is that they do contact tracing all day Saturday and Sunday.
I've never heard of Miramis quarantining because their result on the second group is almost immediate. It's within a day. They get that result out very, very fast. And that's one of the values of their system, is that they use existing materials that they have to do that immediate test. With the state system that's being proposed, there is a need for positives in the pool to be quarantined or get further tests. Now that's the state. The state is working their way through this. Nobody's ever done it before. It's the first state to even offer to pay for it, but they may end up using the Miramis system at some time, and that's what the collaborative is trying to fight tonight, to get the state to do another system like the Miramis.
So what the state says, what DESE says, is that for their 6-week early launch, that the plan would be that if the pool was positive, you would take the 24 people in the pool and that you would use the Abbott Binix Now rapid antigen test as the follow-up test for the people in the pool. Now, I think that we would need to look into that because that's very different. And you recall that we hopped onto their pilot for their rapid antigen test, and we're about to have the capability to do that. You know, our clear understanding is that the usefulness of that test is for people who are symptomatic, and this the you know, the whole point of this is to identify people who are asymptomatic, right? So that's puzzling, but I will tell you that they did have an epidemiologist on the webinar who, you know, great length described why they think that this is going to work for this particular purpose, and they provided some follow-up reading. I have not read it yet, but I will do that. But that is their plan, and I think that, Maya, is the answer to your question. How would you quickly deal with that?
Right.
Yeah.
And presumably, if we opt in to the state plan by submitting tomorrow,
yeah,
and then the state releases the details of the plan and we don't like it, we can opt out.
I assume we could pull out. I mean, my sense wasn't that, I mean, and sometimes you submit interest and then they choose some districts to participate. But my sense was that if you are interested, you're in. You know, I don't think it would be like we'd mess up a slot for someone else or
right.
Yeah.
And then for cost purposes, we wouldn't be testing all remote students, right? So that might bring the 3,000 number down.
That is an excellent point. So that would bring, so that'd be like 2,700 students. Yeah.
It's still high, but.
Well, you just saved $1,500 or something. So
added
yeah.
value.
Yeah.
I mean, the other
Thank
piece,
you.
I mean, reading between the lines from the superintendent saying, I mean, if they got this up and running, I can't imagine before February break. I mean, it's gonna, there's every week. Yeah, the statewide. I mean, they can't, you know, figure out how to vaccinate people with hundreds of thousands of vaccines in the refrigerator. So I don't know. I think it's gonna. My sense is it's gonna take at least a few weeks to get this up and running.
No, I agree. I mean, I think it's worth throwing our name in.
Yeah.
But given all the promises that they made over the summer about all the assistance we were going to get for the reopening plan and how very, very little assistance actually showed up, I'm sort of an Emily's camp where I don't know. I'm not. Maybe I'm not even as cautiously optimistic as you are.
Are you saying you're skeptical of the state coming through in Massachusetts?
As someone who's been on a school committee for the past 6 months, yes, I am skeptical of the state coming through.
Shocking.
I mean, I hope, you know, I'm hopeful, I guess. I'm trying to stay optimistic because I do think it would be fantastic. I mean, as you know, we've talked about it before. I have found the cost daunting, and I do feel like if they could get it to $5 a test and we get $100,000 in stimulus money, we're in reach.
Right.
Now, I have to say, you know, so Lemma and I have looked at that a lot, and we've looked at what do we think are our, our COVID expenses this year that were unanticipated. And of course, we had some strategies to carve out room in the budget by cutting some positions. And then we did get $225 a student from the state. And the saving grace is that the town has been fantastic about allowing us to spend CARES Act money that came to the town, right? So due to all of those factors, in talking to Lemma, you know, we would need to carve out like $200K beyond the stimulus money, we think.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been, I can just say, I mean, I've been reviewing the numbers. I've been, combing through COVID expenses that our staff has been logging over the past several months. We've made an attempt to keep track of this in order to apply for FEMA funding and to make sure that we are using our COVID reopening funds in the appropriate ways and assigning expenses correctly. So with all of that, like in combing through it, we find that we've spent a lot of money, well over $2 million between all of the various things that had to happen, like staffing changes, overtime, evaluations that were required for students that were missed in periods of closure. And then, of course, the PPE and the filters, a lot of stuff, a lot of technology that we bought. and invested in. I would actually say that the technology is one of the biggest pieces that we invested in this year. And so that funding spent, but I think we also were in a good shape to contemplate the student testing. And if we're looking at about 200,000 coming from the budget towards that effort, I think we'll be able to do it and still close the budget. And that's because of the cuts that were made and responsible decisions around reallocating staff. So as much as possible this year, we use the staff that we've got on board to provide the services that we need. And we, in some cases, had to ask people to really work with us and to deliver and work with students in new ways. So all of that made a difference here and gives us that flexibility to see what we can do as the year closes.
I just wanted to say that I think, we've been dumping on the state a little bit, but it's the only state in the country that has even attempted to help out little towns like us. I mean, no state has talked about giving money for testing. So that's a step. Do they know what they're doing? No, but no one's ever done this before. There's no plan. We're all complaining. No one's ever done this. It's the first time we've had a pandemic. We've never, so give them credit. In fairness to this crazy collaborative, their guidance is what's giving them some idea. The 10 towns that have been doing testing of students now for the last 2 months are not stupid. They have some of the greatest scientific advisory groups. They spent a lot of time. They've debated this an awful lot, and they're doing it for the $15, maybe 5 or 10. So I think it's well worth our while. At least get in line. If it seems to be a program, Emily, that is too wasteful, or no, you can drop out of it. But the bottom line is, if the ultimate goal of all of us is to get as many kids and teachers back to the real school, this is a step you got to take. You can, postpone it or think of other things being more important. But until you get a good line of who these kids are and who infects them and who they infect, the same, you're not going to be able to get back as soon as we hope to be. So it's at least, I think, worth getting into it, taking advantage of it, maybe advising them a little bit, because they're learning every day themselves. They're not sure it's perfect, but all they've come up with is maybe we ought to help these towns out by giving them some money.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you said that, Charlie. Good reminder for Saul. Like I'm the last person who should dump on people who are trying to do their best, right? So I think you're right. And I assumed that I would be, I've already filled out the survey. I just haven't hit submit. So I'm assuming that we're going to put in for the 6 weeks free. And I guess I just wanted to sort of put the rest of it out there. Clearly we can do that. Well, I say clearly, I haven't heard the logistics of what it'll take, but we'll figure that out, I think. And then I just wanted to kind of put the rest of the information out there for the school committee. We don't have to decide tonight, but we would have to get the funding.
I'm still unsure about participation. So I think this free pilot could be a good opportunity to gauge participation before we invest a lot of money. Yeah. So I'm in favor of doing it for that reason. I also think it might make sense. I think it seems like through the collaborative, we have a good idea of how the Miramis program works. But once we know what the state program is, to maybe resurvey parents, because I know if there is any sort of lengthy quarantine, a pool quarantine, 24 students associated with whatever state program they use, I would imagine that that's really going to impact whether parents have their students participate.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to emphasize that I haven't heard of anything where people are quarantined for a significant period of time, right? It might be sort of like 24 hours to figure it out. But Amanda, I think that's an excellent point that we can use sort of the free trial to figure out how it goes and who's interested in participating. And our survey data suggested that this is something that parents are, many parents are interested in. It's the same thing where, what they say is for it to be really working, you really need 70% participation, ideally 80%.
Yeah, and the other thing I think we've learned, I think Charlie can talk from the collaborative, is really if we do go forward with the student, is some type of very short webinar training. I don't know training, but some communication, because I think people understand. Some people aren't used to kind of the surveillance testing, and I think the other piece, kind of echoing a little bit what we talked about earlier, is I think as the weeks develop, is understanding how this fits in on the overall plan. because there's a lot of things going on, and I think it needs to kind of all come together, hopefully in a unified plan for bringing the kids back.
Right, I agree. And so I'm hoping that if we submit our interest, that more details will quickly emerge about timeline and logistics. So that would be helpful. So I'll submit that at this point, and then hope that we have more information soon. Is that the
Okay.
plan?
Yep,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. All right. Let's go back to the first discussion item, which was the strategic priorities update, diversity, equity, and inclusion work.
Great. So I'm gonna turn it over to Allison. I sort of alluded to the fact earlier that this has been a hard year to feel like we're really making good progress on some of the things that we say are our priorities in the district. And there are some things that we've really been holding on to, though, and trying to keep the forward motion going. And I'm going to credit Allison that I feel like most of those issues somehow have fallen under her purview, and I feel like she's keeping the train going here while we focus on some other things. So we're just going to give you kind of a quick update tonight on some things that we've been working on. So Allison, give me 1 second and I will get your presentation up for you. There we go.
Great, thank you. And I gotta just do a quick adjustment because I have to be able to read my own presentation here. All right. So, I know we did a little bit of a kind of quick blast update maybe a couple months ago around this strategic priority as well, but I just wanted to loop back and remind you kind of what the line in our strategic priority plan is, which currently reads to implement programs and instructional practices that recognize and support the needs of students and families in an increasingly diverse community. And I just want to make an interesting note that I think a sign that we are sort of shifting into a different gear, I guess, as a district around this is that the district leadership team has now kind of determined and committed to revising this specific line. I think in part because there's a recognition that there's implicit in the line, there's a sense that we're doing this in response to a change in demographics. And I think what we're wanting to sort of indicate is we think the work is important and needs to be happening regardless of kind of who's in the community, that this is stuff that has to do with kind of the core mission of schools and our values. And we want to make sure that we are creating a place that is equitable and integrated and where everybody feels welcome. And so that's, we're going to be revising language somewhat there. So we can go on to the next one. This is a quick snapshot of some of the things that have been going on, particularly in the last few months. So, I'm not going to read through everything, but I think our efforts really fall into three broad buckets. There are those that relate to curriculum and instruction. And I've got some kind of broad strokes things listed there. We have some other efforts around school and different district culture, and I want to kind of particularly call a few of these things out. There's a group called Let's Talk About Race, Culture, and Ethnicity that had kind of died out a few years ago and was revitalized recently at the high school. A really exciting new welcome club at the Thurston Middle School that the PTO has helped kind of get off the ground. We have some guest speakers and events that have happened or are about to happen. And a really kind of interesting development, every single one of our elementary schools now has that kind of organically started anti-racist educator group. These are sort of groups, quite a number of people who are doing this came out of the district-wide group that formed a couple of years ago, and they've sort of blossomed into kind of a more building-based group. We have a book talk coming up with Jennifer de Leon, and we've run a number of different sort of book group experiences. I also want to say a big focus of our efforts is in the realm of recruiting, hiring, and retention. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, because I think that is a place where in particular, we're looking to sort of shift into another gear. But we really, we have some real work to do, and we're seeing that and need to begin to kind of approach it differently, I think. I'm gonna go ahead and shift. And I think if I were to characterize where we are in this moment, it's that we're in the process of shifting from work that is intentional, but I describe it as somewhat scattershot, like we're just sort of doing a lot of stuff all over the place. And, you know, I think people are excited about it. They are very passionate about it, but we are starting to look at how can we be more strategic and kind of focused and data-driven with our efforts. So a couple examples of this. First of all, I think we're investing, and I shared a memo with the superintendent in some leadership team training. And really the goal of that is to help make sure that we have kind of common focal points and understanding across the district with our leadership groups so that these efforts have some momentum and oversight from the leadership team. We also are looking at some efforts that are more strategic and data-driven that are going to sort of grow over the arc of the next, I would say, year or so. The first, I may have mentioned before, we're participating in DESE's Diversity Network, which is this great program that the Department of Ed has put together for member districts. And it's really about using a kind of data-informed, very thoughtful process for the diversification of staff. We also have the opportunity, thanks to our affiliation with METCO, to participate in an equity audit that is, it's a free online kind of assessment, self-assessment tool to help us identify some kind of critical growth areas. And we're looking at that tool right now. I will say, I like, in general, I think there's real power in the idea of an audit. The online tool has some real advantages, namely that it is free, which is great. And it gives us very quick feedback. So we kind of do the process and get some information back quickly that we can act on. I would say the downside is sometimes there are things you can gain from a more robust audit process that this might not give us. It may be the sort of thing we do first and then look to do a more thorough kind of a different type of an audit later if we decide that's needed. And finally, we have a team that is digging into a kind of program that developed out of Harvard's ed school called RIDES, which I'm going to forget the acronym. It's like Reimagining Integration, Diversity, and Equity. And it is basically an approach that was developed to be very strategic and cyclic in terms of identifying goals, setting targets for those goals, and working through what they call an equity improvement cycle. So those are some ways I think we're going to try and shift gears. And I have a couple examples of things to show you that give you a sense of what looks different. You know, one of those examples, and this is kind of tiny print, I apologize for that, but as part of that DESE Diversity Network program, we're asked to really like reflect and do some self-assessment and use that self-assessment data to kind of track our performance over time. It's a way of kind of getting us to get some traction and forward momentum. So for example, this is a self-assessment tool related to the idea of teacher retention. So if you are able to recruit and hire some staff of color, what are you doing to make sure you keep them, right? And this is, as you can see, our self-ratings, we've got some ways to go. This is only one page of a couple, but I wanted to give you a quick snapshot. And the idea is we'll be back to revisit this in February and again in April. And hopefully we'll be able to see some moving of the dial at that point. We can go ahead into the next one. In addition to sort of self-analysis, there is the part of analyzing data and setting some clear goals for yourself. So these are a couple interesting snapshots I wanted to share. This is, I'll describe it as incomplete data in a bunch of different ways. So I want to be really clear that that's what you're looking at. First of all, there's a snapshot of our staff data around staff broken down by race and ethnicity categories. You can take a look at and see that we are still very, very predominantly a district where the overwhelming majority of our staff are white. And so relatively little diversity in terms of these sort of very broad sweeping categories around race and ethnicity, okay? I want to sort of introduce a caveat, which this data is not a complete data set. We don't have good data on a few groups within our district that's particularly accurate because of the hiring process doesn't involve self-reporting for some groups. And so we're looking at ways to address that so that we can actually really gather that data consistently and look at how we're doing.
Do you use the EEOC categories when people self-report?
Yeah, the categories that are used are actually through the ones we have primary access to are through EPIMS, which is an educator kind of sign-on program. So
they're different categories.
They may be different categories. Yeah, they're kind of old. Yeah, they're not necessarily matching up perfectly. The other chart I wanted to show you, and again, this is what I mean by really incomplete data.
Do you have like, I guess 2 questions, not for now. I'd be interested to see this breakdown by kind of different, types of staff.
Different units. Yep.
Yeah, that's fine. But the other question is, and this is I know a large exercise. I mean, this looks great because we've hired a bunch, but it gets to your other thing around retention. Do you have data that shows that we have done how our retention has been historically among these categories?
Right. And that is actually data we're working at getting right now. Right now. So what I have is a snapshot that says, here's our breakdown of staff. Here's when our current staff were hired. That's what the chart shows. So it shows that for people currently working in the district, who are people of color, most of them were hired in the last several years. But what we don't know is, we don't know yet, and we're working on I should have that in the next day or so. I'm happy to share it out with the committee.
Yeah.
Did something happen in a particular year where we had a great year in recruiting and we just lost a bunch of people, right? So those are things we really need to explore if we're going to have a sustained effort over time. So that's kind of a snapshot of this shift. I think we have, I'd say broadly, the good news is that there is sort of widespread interest and participation in a lot of different ways in trying to make sure the environment is one that really embraces all of our students and their families and does right by them. And I think that's important. And what we're trying to do is figure out how to take all that goodwill and interest and sort of really focus it in a direction where we can make some systemic change over time. So go to the last slide. I wanted to throw a bunch of names up here because there are a lot of groups of people, different groups of people. And I know this is I missed some people, I'm sure, because there's so much going on. But a few key people who have been involved in that diversity team network are listed up there. A couple people joining that core team who are going to help with the Harvard Rides work are Matt Kuklitz and Aaron Kuhn, the Latarse Advisors, Welcoming Schools Working Group, which was really running more last year, but that actually kind of helped, I think, jumpstart some of the work around the Anti-Racist Educators Group. We've had wonderful staff engaged in professional development and leading book groups. The Thurston and Hanlon PTOs in particular, I think, have had some real great momentum around this. And we had staff who helped develop PD this last fall. That was great. So I want to make sure to give credit where credit's due. And happy to answer any questions you have or take comments or suggestions.
Thank you for a couple of quick points. One is I've noticed a couple of times attending the Medco dinner, a couple of the people made notice that some of the towns bring Medco kids in the first grade and they grow up with all of the Westwood kids. Westwood, we bring them in the 6th grade. So the kids who already have made friends in grades 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 now have to leave their friends, and it's an adjustment. And so one question I put out there to consider is how difficult would it be to begin to bring in Medco kids in the first grade? The second thing, just a crazy idea, I apologize, but how about thinking about whether you could have a Medco program for teachers, you know, hiring teachers, getting the numbers. But what if we had a program where we could borrow a teacher for 2 years, and one of our teachers might want to go in and teach in the inner city, and it's like an exchange. You can't leave the town, but you know, it's an opportunity to get some imaginative, creative inner city teachers to come out and educate our kids a little bit. But could that be possible without huge changes in budgets or everything? Thirdly, the chart you showed, is it possible to get it for, you know, probably another 20 towns? Are we way ahead of everybody or way behind everybody with regard to numbers that we have recruited? It'd be a good idea just to kind of get a flavor for that. And I also want to pay tribute to our former school member emeritus, Josepha Jowdy, who was honored at the last get-together with Medco for the great services she provided to Medco students in Westwood. She used to take them home after a night performance here and a choir, this, that. They stayed with her, she fed them, and they couldn't help but thank her for her great generosity. And in a recent meeting with the town plan committee, the issue of diversity came up. How do we as a town become more interested and supportive? So there is a lot of interest in this topic at the town level. And I think there was a lot of interest at that time in what our Medco program is doing, and how could the town be more supportive of the Medco program? Are there other things townspeople could be doing outside of the school system to be helpful? So there's an opportunity to look into that, I think, that I just was suddenly aware of that interest. But thanks so much for putting this together and educating us.
Thank you. Yeah, to your last point, Charlie, my understanding is there's some rumblings around about a task force that may be starting at the town level, and the school district certainly hopes to sort of help participate in that.
Thanks, Allison. I think one of the things I'm interested in sort of digging deeper into is the changes that have been made at the curriculum level. I think for me, particularly as a school committee member, I'm very interested in that. I also think that's something that's wholly within our control. You know, clearly recruiting is not necessarily within our control. It depends on the applicants we get. We can certainly make efforts, but curriculum and the texts that students are reading and analyzing and discussing, certainly within our control. And so I'd really like to understand, I know you touched on that, you know, there are certain things that you were looking at, but I'd really like to understand what we've done and what this, you know, what strategic or what strategies we have going forward for introducing a more diverse curriculum to our students. And to your point, it's not just about demographics, right? It's every student benefits from different perspectives. It doesn't matter whether, I just think that it's a critical part of education is the difference in perspectives, and that is something we can actually control. So
it's a really great point, and I think I have mentioned this before. We had some students who are alums of the Westwood Public Schools who came back to meet with a former teacher, and then based on that conversation came to meet with Emily and I and Amy Davenport. And I think one message we really heard from them is they felt they didn't have a kind of a perspective about the world that they needed before leaving a kind of small town in Massachusetts, that they needed a better understanding of kind of the diversity that's out there in the wider world before they left here. So I wholeheadily agree. But we can definitely, I can talk with our kind of curriculum leadership folks. I would say that the most sort of, I think the most sort of obvious changes are around text in primarily English and literacy programs, and we can kind of show you what those look like and some of the things that are happening. We kind of got cut off at the knees in our social studies review this last year, but I'm hoping to bring that back in the next couple months and kind of jumpstart it and get it rolling again. And we anticipate some things happening there too.
Yeah. Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Allison. All right, we'll move on now to the 2021-2022 school calendar.
Yes. So you have a proposed draft calendar in your packet, and you remember that we established our rule of thumb about Labor Day and when the student's first day was. So John put this together, applying that. You can see how it comes out. I will say that one thing that it's sort of notable on the calendar is that according to that rule of thumb, students would return on Wednesday, September 1st and Thursday the 2nd. And then we have, contractually, we have the Friday prior to the Labor Day weekend off. This year, it so happens that Rosh Hashanah falls on the Tuesday after Labor Day. So I guess it could be a even longer weekend. That's the way it's coming out on the calendar right now. Everything else that I looked at didn't seem terribly notable. We've put the all-day in-service back on the Monday after Thanksgiving.
Anybody have any comments on the calendar?
I mean, I'll just ask the question since you raised it. I mean, I know you'd have to go to the union, but would you well, we should ask the committee, but I guess would you have interest, given next year's calendar, in going 3 days and then having the 4-day weekend with that Tuesday?
Mm-hmm.
And I know you'd have to talk to the WTA.
Yeah.
Just a question.
You know, I did raise it, and I really should have raised it with principals before
Okay.
raising it here. But so I will do that. My energy level right now, I'm like, yes, very long weekend. But I think that maybe how we might be feeling is, that it would be disjointed. It'd be a strange way to start and then have that much time off. But let me talk to people and get back to you. Yeah, we would have to go to the WTA and ask.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Does the committee have feelings about that one way or the other, or?
I'm in agreement with doing that. I feel like when I looked at the calendar, it felt, and granted, I don't know what rule of thumb you're talking about with the Labor Day piece. So that aside, when I looked at the calendar, it did feel disjointed. And I just thought about working parents and like how hard the first day of school is. Like a lot of parents want to be there. And then you've got this long weekend you're trying to find coverage. And it just felt like it would be really kind of stressful to figure that all out.
Mm-hmm.
I think the rule of thumb, Amanda, is if Labor Day is on the 3rd or earlier, then the 4th or earlier, then we start after Labor Day. If it's after the 4th, we start before Labor Day.
That's correct. It's in tiny little print on the bottom of your calendar.
Yeah.
Tony, I'm sorry. Can you repeat what it is what were you suggesting?
So my question was around, because next year is a little unusual because we have, I can't remember which one, Rosh Hashanah is on Tuesday, the Tuesday after Labor Day.
Yeah.
If we give the Friday before Labor Day, you're going to have really a 5-day weekend as opposed to a 4-day weekend.
Right.
And it's just a little even extra disjointed. So maybe can you get some, if the principals and obviously the teachers have to agree, maybe you get momentum of having 3 days, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday before Labor Day, people still get a 4-day weekend. Well, at least I know that it's a religious holiday on Tuesday, but people can still get a 4-day weekend after that. So basically go the Friday before Labor Day next year, just because it's, again, an unusual year with the calendar.
Mm-hmm. And then of course, it never changes the number of days. So all it would do is it would move the last day for students back by a day.
Yeah.
It would be the last day, June 16th. Yeah.
Only playing devil's advocate here, I would say that Tuesday is not a holiday for most people. It's either not just a religious. I mean, most people work on the Tuesday. So if people go away, they'd probably have to come back on the Monday anyway. Mm-hmm. So I think taking away the Friday might feel like you're just taking away the Friday. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, my point is more from an academic, I
agree. It's a long time. It's weird to go 2 days for school and then be out for 5.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking as, a working parent, that's really taking away Friday, but not giving me Tuesday.
Fair enough.
Well, we usually sort of introduce the draft and then keep it open for a month in case, members of the public have feelings about it and want to let us know. So I'd be curious what parents think about that.
Yeah, maybe people have views today.
Yeah. Yep. We'd love to hear them.
Okay. So
Okay,
leave it open for a month. And
we'll
then
leave it, let's leave it open.
Okay.
And we can have further discussion on this next time. All right, let's move on to policy revisions related to Title IX.
Right. So this is the second reading of these policy revisions, and Allison sent you a memo last month, and really these policy revisions are to bring us in line with the law. And correct me if I'm wrong, Allison, but sort of the advice that we've been given is that we should do these as separate policies. There is some sense, some of the legal advice we're getting is that in the next several months, with the change in administration at the federal level, that there might be further changes in Title IX. And if we have to respond to those further changes, it's easier to have them in a separate policy so that we don't have to revise our entire, anti-harassment policy.
Yeah, that's the gist of it. Yeah, I mean, I think the timeline they're saying would be longer. It wouldn't be quick, like a quick turnaround because it's a final rule situation. But I think there's that argument. There's also just the argument that the federal final rule differs somewhat from state law. So we need to have some things in place that still reflect the Massachusetts state definitions and things like that. So we have to have kind of a comprehensive capacity to approach whatever situations come up. So.
This is going to sound like a weird question, but can I ask a question? So
yes,
so there's a specific carve out on section B around if there's a complaint against the Title IX coordinator and what you do. And this is just more from a governance, is it, maybe that's lawyers. Sometimes I'm used in corporations, they have carve outs for CEOs or superintendent. What happens if there's a complaint, in this case, against the superintendent? Is that, it's just more of a question for the lawyers, if there's a different situation, if that happens as well.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is our kind of policy and protocol does indicate pretty clearly in I think our main policy in a lot of detail, like if it's a complaint against the investigator that bumps to the next person, if it's against the, I think ultimately ends up with you all. So congratulations.
Okay. Well, maybe, okay. Well, I just maybe asked them if there should be any other specific language. If not, that's fine.
Yeah.
So we could circle back and ask that. Maybe there's parallel language in the other policy that we should bring.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe I didn't see it. Yeah.
No,
sure.
We'll look at that.
I have a few comments, if that's okay.
Sure.
On the Title IX policy itself, not on the grievance procedure. There's a public notice and dissemination of policy section, and it sort of bullet points things that we should put on the website or publish and make available online. I would just recommend that we add to that bullet the contact info for the Title IX coordinator, because I think that's the first thing that people are going to want to look for, and they're probably going to go online first.
Yeah.
And I know that's in the handbook, but I think if we can add it to the online. And then in the grievance itself, in the procedure itself, in section B, I was a little confused because it says that students and employees who believe they've experienced or witnessed sexual harassment should notify the district's designated Title IX coordinator, the assistant superintendent of schools. And I wasn't sure if we were naming the Title IX coordinator in this document as the assistant superintendent of schools. I'm just not sure that's the right place to name the Title IX coordinator. Or if it was.
Are you looking in the?
I'm looking in the grievance policy.
In the procedure.
So the second policy.
So,
in the procedure.
Let me see if I understand. So though it happens that the assistant superintendent of schools now is the Title IX coordinator, you're suggesting that we don't need to name that in the policy?
Well, it's the only place I saw it designated. And I would just strike the assistant superintendent of schools here because it may or may not be.
That could change. Yeah.
Right.
Then we don't change the policy. Yeah.
Right. Sorry, two more comments. In the same grievance procedure, under B, filing a formal complaint, it says a formal complaint may be filed in writing by the complainant or presented verbally and put in writing and signed by the Title IX coordinator. When we define formal complaint above, we say it can be put in writing by the complainer or the complainer's parents or guardian. So I think we should be consistent and just bring that language down here. And so under filing a formal complaint, make it clear that it's either the complainant or their parents or guardians. And that would track with the actual definition of it.
Thank you. That's a great catch. Thanks.
And then finally, the appeal procedure. It says the appeal should be submitted in writing within 10 calendar days. And then the superintendent, makes the designation, but there's no time frame by which the superintendent needs to make a designation. So as a parent, I would probably want to know how long does the superintendent have to, to make that determination. So I would just suggest adding a time frame on the final determination.
I think that there is something in the other policy too, so we should try to make those consistent. That would be great.
Yep.
Okay. Yep.
And that's it.
Thank you.
Any other comments on these policies? No? Okay.
We'll bring it back for third reading.
All right. Sounds good.
Yep.
All right.
And just one.
Yeah.
Oh, never mind. I
No,
was
go
going
ahead.
to say one note that's interesting. We don't typically do like a full-fledged vote on the sort of procedural side of the bucket, but in this case, because the most recent final rule on Title IX is so detailed about matters of procedure, that's why this was brought forward for your kind of careful review in terms of exactly the matters that you're looking at. So I wanted to thank you for your patience and work looking into it, because it's sort of an unusual request. So.
Right. Okay. Thank you. All right. At this point, we're going to move into our public participation part of this meeting. So public participation gives community members the opportunity to ask questions or to comment on issues pertaining to education here in Westwood. I would ask folks that when they participate today, that first of all, you provide your name and your street address, and that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. Understand that we listen to all of your comments, but we are not bound in any way to comment on your comments or to answer your questions. So please don't take that as an affront. It's just, that is the process, but we are listening. So Connor, I think I'm going to turn it over to you, right? Are you taking the reins on this?
Yeah, as far as I'm aware.
Sorry,
Okay.
I couldn't.
Yes, I'll be doing that for tonight.
Okay, perfect. So let's get started with
okay.
folks in the pipeline. Thanks.
So just for people who are aware, if you're watching on YouTube or on cable, at the bottom of the screen is the login information for the Zoom webinar. So you can follow those in order to join. And once you do, at the bottom of your screen, there is a raise hand feature. So all you need to do is click the raised hand. And once I see your name, I will give you the ability to talk. So
Okay, and one more thing I want to add, Connor, too. I just want to make folks aware of the fact that all comments and all questions should be addressed to the committee. That's now you can go from there. Thank you.
Okay. The first person I will be unmuting is Stephanie Ramales. So
Hello,
Stephanie, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you. My name is Stephanie Ramales. I reside at 129 Washington Street. First of all, I'd like to start by expressing my gratitude at having the opportunity to speak to the committee this evening. I'm a social worker and an essential worker who's been on the front lines in a subacute rehab and nursing facility during the entirety of this pandemic. Believe me when I tell you I understand the safety concerns and the gravity of the situation impacting us all at this time. I'm also well aware that there are, of course, no easy answers to any of the questions we are facing. However, I'm speaking tonight to express my concern that Westwood Public Schools has yet to introduce a fully detailed plan and timeline to return to full in-person learning in school buildings. I understand that a return to full-time in-person learning requires planning and a phased approach. However, it seems that we've stalled in the process. This is inexcusable as it is our children who are bearing the bulk of the negative consequences the hybrid model is creating. Of great concern to me at this time is the continued use of remote-only Wednesdays in the regular schedule. There's no public health evidence or DESE policies outlining a need to have students out of the buildings for a full weekday every week. For students in grades K through 3, there's absolutely no justification for this to continue, as students are already in school 4 days a week, and the remote day in the middle of the week does not address any widely accepted safety strategy to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. In terms of the other grades that continue to attend a schedule of alternating cohort days, there is no additional safety risk posed by having these students return to school on a schedule of alternating Wednesdays. Throughout this process, many people have shared their very different opinions on various aspects of the reopening plan. However, there's no doubt that if all other safety concerns are equal, in-person learning is far superior to remote learning in its ability to address children's academic, developmental, social, and emotional needs. I understand Superintendent Parks' comment that Wednesdays are a relief valve for staff and contact tracing efforts. However, these concerns should not take precedence over the needs of the students and their right to increased class time. I would argue that given the amount of in-person learning that has been lost, blocking access to an in-person learning a full day each week to use as a relief valve for staff is a serious misappropriation of resources at this critical time. Therefore, it is unacceptable to continue to limit student access to in-person learning for an entire day every week when this policy has no bearing on evidence-based COVID-19 safety strategies and protocols. To proceed without addressing this issue runs counter to the mission of the Westwood Public School System and is in direct opposition to the role of the school committee. We should be prioritizing the use of risk mitigation and safety strategies to ensure the most possible access to in-person learning, not as a tool to limit classroom time. This issue has been discussed multiple times with no resolution and no satisfactory response as to why it cannot proceed. I'm asking that the school committee address the issue of remote Wednesdays immediately. Thank you all so much for your time and attention this evening.
Okay. Connor?
The next person I will be unmuting is Donna Morrison. So Donna, you should be allowed to unmute yourself.
Donna?
Thank you. Thank you. Donna Morrison, 303 Oak Street. In addition to thanking the COVID team, teachers, administration, operation, DPH, doctors and nurses, everyone else, I'd also like to thank all the parents, caregivers, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and everybody else behind the scenes that are working very hard to keep their children in learning, whether it be remotely or in the hybrid model. We had to make the choice to remove our student from the hybrid model to keep her at home. I must say that this is the best year she's had academically. She has received no bullying from her classmates. We've not had to experience any tormenting, and she is thriving. So for that, we are grateful. The fact that she's not associating with her other friends, that is to her detriment, but we did have to make that decision. So thank you for having that remote model available to her. I wanted to address the budget for the testing of the teachers and staff, where not all the staff is in full participation. That is a significant amount of money for the town to request its taxpayers to put out for not full participation. So I would really hope that you would consider the state model where we could jump in at having them pay for it for us. I would be more I would be much more convinced if more of the staff, 85 to 90% participation rather than 64 to 70% were participating at that. And finally, to Charlie's suggestion on the METCO for students in the elementary grades. In the 80s and 90s, in fact, there were Metco students that were bused in. They were in kindergarten, first, second, third. Every single grade had a Metco student in it, at least one student, and they tracked all the way through high school. So that would be something that would definitely be worth revisiting and to everyone's benefit.
Thank you, Donna. I'm gonna have to cut you off here. I'm sorry. We gotta go to our next person. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you so much.
Okay. The next person I'll be unmuting is Megan Brink. Megan, you should be allowed to unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. This is Megan Brink at 47 Briar Lane. It's good to see you all. I just wanted to say that I'm in support of keeping the remote Wednesdays for the rest of the year. I think we need to support our teachers. They have come back to school this year and are doing so much for us already. They have a routine that they are in as professionals and as parents, potentially themselves and in their own personal lives. I think it would be very disruptive on that end. And as a parent, while this is not scientifically backed, and I'm a stay-at-home mom, so I realize with kids that are in 4 days a week, so I understand that I'm in the best scenario of all the parents in Westwood probably right now. But since the beginning of the pandemic, even when community spread was really low, I liked when it rained outside. I liked when we had a bad weather day. I liked when we had a break. It kind of gave me as a parent a chance to reel everyone back in, think about our actions, and kind of get serious again about staying safe. And it gave us a chance to make sure everyone was feeling good before we went back outside and played with the kids in the neighborhood, before we went to the next softball game, you know, or whatever it was. So I like having the remote Wednesdays for that. It's peace of mind. It allows you guys to do a lot of work. So besides the logistics and the science, it just kind of feels good to keep it that way for the rest of the school year, especially if it's good for our teachers. I think they've already done so much. So thank you for that and have a nice night.
Thank you, Megan. Okay.
Okay. The next person I'll be unmuting is Jackie K. So Jackie, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yep. Hi, I'm Jackie Keaveney, 22 Redwood Road. I have a question. Do you plan to send the kids back to school this year, full time?
Okay. Well, we're not, as I indicated earlier, we're not bound to answer questions, but we realize that is a question from the community. We're going to move on to our next person.
Wait.
Okay. The next person is Amy Thomont. Amy, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. This is Amy Thomont, 52 Woodridge Road. I had a question on the vaccines and when they're available to teachers in phase 2. Is it going to be a requirement that the teachers receive the vaccine? The only reason I'm asking is because Massachusetts put in the requirement for children to get flu shots by December 31st, 2020. And so I'm just wondering if there's anything put in place to teachers, for teachers, because this may speed up the obviously safety of everyone and the potential of back to school in-person learning. That's all.
Thank you.
Okay. The next person I'll be unmuting is Tina Collins. So Tina, you should be able to unmute.
Hi, my name's Tina Collins. I live at 19 Bonnie Street. And I was just wondering, I know currently there is no plan to get the kids back in full time. I know you're aware that a large group of us would love that to happen. And I'm just wondering, I know over the summer you had to submit 3 different plans, I believe, to back to school, remote, hybrid, and full-time in person. So I'm just wondering if there's any chance that the full-time 3-foot distance in-person learning plan from the summer could be revisited and we could go back to the bargaining table with the teachers and renegotiate, knowing that testing is going to be available to them and the vaccine is going to be available to them soon, and that in the original agreement between Westwood and the teachers, both parties agreed to come back to the bargaining table in good faith with any events or changes that happens, so that we can potentially get the kids back into school full time. We're trying to figure out any way we can to try to get these kids back. And DESE has stated that a 3-foot distance is acceptable with other safeguards in place. Obviously, there's an option for people to be full remote if they don't feel comfortable with that. And I understand people not being comfortable with being back full time, but I just feel this is really harmful on the kids. I know my kids always loved school, and it's getting to the point where they don't even want to go in the 2 days a week anymore sometimes, because they feel like they can't really talk to their friends at all. They're not really getting any mask breaks of any sort. They sit there with their coats on because the windows are open all day. It's really just an uncomfortable time for them. And I feel terrible because I have 3 kids, 2 at Martha Jones and 1 at Thurston. And they're really just not happy. They're not the same kids that they were last year. And I just see it getting worse as the year goes on. And we'd really love to see them back in school. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tina.
The next person I'll be unmuting is Ann Donahue. So Ann, you should be able to unmute yourself.
I am unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Hi so much. My name's Ann Donahue. I live at 40 Parker. Thanks for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'd really just like to make a comment and pose 2 quick questions about our children's well-being during remote learning. I think back to Governor Baker's November press conference, which included comments from Dr. Miato from the Mass chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. She noted some trends that really stuck with me over the past few months because I can see some of these things at home. These trends included some expected negative outcomes that you'd think would happen during a pandemic like this for the kids, including things like weight gain, inactivity, and lack of access to nutritious meals in some cases. But even more upsetting to me was her acknowledgement that in her area, local specialists had reported more hospitalizations for youth suicide attempts than pediatric COVID cases. Many of these youth had no history of behavioral health issues before. We're 10 months into this really strange reality for everyone, and I feel for everybody involved, but I believe our kids are really bending under the stress of the pandemic, the isolation, and the acute loss of friendships that they're feeling from their missed time at school. School is so much more than just the curriculum. School is really the way our youth structure their lives. So I'm asking for 2 questions to be answered today. First is, what are we doing to directly support our children's social and emotional development because of the weight of these burdens? And secondly, do we have anybody specifically assigned to addressing these non-COVID related impacts to our kids? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. The next person I'll be unmuting is Lori Bowl. So Lori, you should be able to unmute.
Hi, my name's Lori Burrell at 155 Benzie Drive. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And I understand the challenges that you're facing and everything, but I really would like my kids to be back in school full time. I have 2 children at Thurston Middle School. The youngest is in 6th grade, and she's doing well because she's involved with the Learning Center, and there's a lot of small group Zoom and small group sessions that work well for her. But my oldest son is in 8th grade, and he's not doing it all. He's doing the very minimum to get by and he's not that type of student. When he's in-person school learning, he's thriving. He really puts a lot of interest into his work, and he's enthusiastic and loves it. And this year it's just miserable. And I'm worried about the mental health, basically. And it's just, they need to get back in school. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Lori.
Okay. The next person to be unmuted is Carrie Sejic. So Carrie, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. It's Carrie Sejic, 98 Sycamore Drive. Thank you for giving me a minute. Since we are rapidly approaching 1 year of this, and since testing and vaccines are quickly approaching on the horizon, I would like to know if you can guarantee us that all children in all grades will be back to school full-time, 5 days a week in a normal fashion, which means lunch, recess, before and after school programs, as well as after school activities and sports for the full 21-22 school year? And if so, how will you guarantee it? Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie.
The next person to speak will be Antigone Grasso. So Antigone, you should be able to unmute.
Hi, Tiffany.
Yeah.
Great. Antigone Grasso, 44 Oak Street. I want to thank you for letting me comment. And I also want to say, I know you're not required to answer questions. I think as a parent, having gone through this now for months and months, it's very frustrating, I will say, because there's no parent forum where we can have questions answered. So I'd like you guys for us to consider something where we can actually have a two-way dialogue, because this one way it is frustrating, and I'm sure you guys can appreciate it. So my question is that according to Jared Orsini, the medical advisory group has not endorsed moving from 6 feet to 3 feet in the schools, even with all the other precautions and the evidence of low school-based transmissions. And I wanted to know if that was actually true. So that's not going to be answered. Okay. So if it is true, what I'm wondering is,
we're not, I didn't know you were pausing. Keep asking them, ask the rest of your questions, Antigone.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So if it is true, I'm not sure why there is a duplication of efforts. The state already did a clinical review in collaboration with medical experts to come up with a 3 feet option and a recommendation that it was safe. And in fact, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, who is going to be the new CDC director, said in the fall that 3 feet is perfectly safe. I can certainly send you all that reference. So I'm not sure why, if there isn't the endorsement to 3 feet by this medical advisory group, and that advice is being followed by the district, why is there a duplication of effort and contradicting on what the state has actually already researched and recommended?
Okay, so first of all, Antigone, I know that you've been very clear in you and other parents in the district, and I've articulated your views. We've heard your views over the last several months. We've heard and we've read all of your communications that you've sent via email, and understand too that we're hearing from parents who are wondering why our kids are in school at all at this time. So we're really trying very hard to hold the line here and keep our kids in at hybrid. So just understand that we are hearing you, and we understand people want to be back in school, but on the flip side, there are a lot who are worried about being back in school. Emily, I don't know if you want to make a couple of comments here.
Yeah, I mean, let me just address some of the questions that have come up. I mean, there is a plan to return to full-time. As I think somebody pointed out, we created a reopening plan that allows for 3 different models, and fully in person is one of them. And so, you know, we're able to do that. In fact, we were trying to create schedules in those and structures in those 3 different models that would allow to move from one to the other. So that was part of the, you know, the concept. You know, someone has asked about reopening bargaining. And as we've talked about before, yes, in order for us to move to fully in-person instruction, we would have to do that at 3 feet of physical distance. And that is something that we would have to go back to the bargaining table and bargain. Some of the other things that people have been asking about tonight, vaccines, testing. I mean, I see those as critical pieces in terms of, you know, really concrete action steps that we can take that will be, I think, helpful when we engage in a process about, you know, a bargaining process. And I can tell you that that issue of 6 feet, it was a very significant issue when we were bargaining. You know, I do think that if we can really say we have pulled out all of the stops to do everything we can to mitigate health and safety, that will put us, I mean, I think it's important to do, period, but I also think in this process, it just makes it a different conversation in terms of bringing kids back to school. I mean, of course, I would love to be back. I would love to be back before the end of this year. I actually think that would be fantastic for us as a community if that is something that we're able to do. I think that we're taking these steps to try to put things in place that will be important to reach that objective. So, you know, that's where we are. You know, can I guarantee that everything's going to be back to normal in 21, 22? That is certainly my hope and my dream, and what, you know, what I'm planning for in the budget process. I don't think that I can guarantee anything in this world. I certainly wouldn't have predicted the pandemic. But, you know, I think everyone is waiting for things like, you know, vaccination to help us all sort of resume some semblance of normalcy. So I think that, you know, all of those things are the things that we talk about every day here and that we are working on. And I know that people are frustrated that they feel like it's not happening fast enough. And I get that. And we are balancing, as Carol said, a lot of competing feelings and concerns from a lot of different community members. The fact of the matter is that if we were to return in person at 3 feet, and that significantly changed the proportion of people who wanted fully remote, that would be, it's not as easy as just doing it. I mean, we have staff that are dedicated to fully remote students. And so it might involve changing teachers and schedules in order to make that happen. So, you know, a lot of things hinge on other things here, but we are, you know, I think we're all in agreement that we think it would be wonderful for everyone to be back. I don't know, Abby, there was a question about mental health supports, and that's very much on our minds too. Do you want to say anything about some of those resources we have in place?
Yep, sure. So, you know, I guess what I would just say is the disruption of COVID is front and center in all of our minds all the time. So when you think about particularly the student services staff that provide social, emotional, and mental health supports to students, I think there's been a lot of focus this year on connection, maintaining and keeping connection with kids and among kids and with adults, as well as thinking about resilience and how kids can continue to develop during the year as they go through this situation with us. I think it's a very good reminder that that is a key thing for us to continue to focus on. And just very, very briefly, you know, our psychological support from the school psychologists at all the levels, pre-K to high school, was pivoted back in March to focus on kids' mental health and social emotional well-being. And I would say the district, you know, expended significant funds to push the evaluation load that was coming from the March closure and into the summer into a way that would not impact kids during the school day. So we actually expended funds to provide so that folks could do those evaluations and score those things, those reports and things after school. And so I hope that preservation of the school psychologists was meaningful and had an impact for students and provided support across the whole district. Additionally, you know, at the middle school, we have an adjustment counselor. We completed recent mental health screenings for students that are important school-wide at the middle school. We have guidance counseling. You know, you guys, the school committee was generous enough to get us to a point where we have a guidance counselor attached to each grade level now, and that's a really important support for students. And then at the, you know, certainly even all the way up through the high school, I just want to say the social work and guidance department at the high school has done a lovely job of supporting students we knew about, as well as students that we didn't know about and we've learned about through the course of this situation. So I want to be honest about that. And I just want to say, you know, the entire Westwood teaching staff did go through professional development before the kids arrived on the impact of chronic stress for students. And that was really well received by the teaching staff and all the support folks. So I think the effort has been to create a cohesive network of folks who are paying attention to mental health. But I hear loud and clear that that needs to be a continued focus, and we will do that.
And just briefly, there was a question about vaccinations. I think the governor's plan, educators are in a phase that starts, I believe, in the middle of February. And then just to remind people on vaccinations, it takes 2 shots for the 2 Moderna and Pfizer, and they're 3 or 4 weeks apart. But then once you've got the second shot, it's typically about 12 days when they're maximally effective. So there's a bit of a lag between even getting your first shot and kind of maximum effectiveness. And this is, of course, all dependent. I know Jared Orsini would love to have more shots. It's obviously dependent on supply and when we can get those as well. So
Someone asked a question about whether or not vaccination will be required for teachers. And, I don't know the answer to that. Somebody did pose that question to the commissioner on a call I was on recently. And he frankly said that he didn't think that that would be legal, but that he was going to, talk to some people and kind of get back to us with thinking about that. So,
Emily, my understanding from working in healthcare, this has come up a lot in my job when there's obviously direct care staff, because the vaccine has been granted under emergency use authorization. At this point, we can't mandate employees to take it.
Yeah, that would be my assumption. But I do think that once there's the opportunity for people to be vaccinated, that does change the conversation.
Okay, thank you all. Connor, anyone else in the pipeline?
We do have a few people. I did want to ask for people who have already spoken before. There are more people who have raised their hands for a second time. I don't know how you want to go about unmuting people for that, or
Yeah,
is that okay?
Let's go. Well, all the people who are in the pipeline now have already spoken, is what you're saying?
No, there are 2 people. There are quite a few who have not spoken yet, so I can unmute them first.
Yes, please unmute them first. Thank you.
Okay. In which case, the next person will be Matthew Travers. So Matthew, you should be able to speak.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to say I appreciate all the work that you're all doing. But many times during this meeting, it was mentioned that the goal is to get children back into the classrooms. And then more recently, you had talked about the plan being at 3 feet. However, this is a sticking point with the bargaining piece. So if that's where we are, it sounds like the plan that we have in place to get children back into class is one that won't work. That being said, other points during the time in this meeting, we talked about the next couple months being very busy with the budget and other things. So I guess it's a question on what is happening currently if we know our plan to get kids back into school in person isn't one that's really going to work, and it's not being addressed at this point, maybe to be looked at again at the end of February if the numbers go down, and then that's when the discussions will start. Is it really a plan that's achievable? So I guess to ask the question is anything currently being worked out to tweak the plan or to start some of the discussions, as Superintendent Park said, to go into a deeper dive with the pros and cons with the teachers and or the bargaining currently to make this happen?
Yeah. So I will just say that we have standing bi-weekly meetings with the leadership of the WTA. So we're engaged in ongoing conversations with them all the time.
That's great. Is it to the point where we're talking about getting closer to a plan that may be able to be implemented and actively achieved if the numbers come down or when the numbers come down, and maybe thinking of a different option around getting kids back at a different than the 3 feet piece?
Right. Well, so, I will say we've talked about this quite a bit, and the 3 feet is just about math. It's about the number of kids we have and the amount of space that we have. And so that's the reality of it. And right now we do have collective bargaining agreement, and collective bargaining is, an official kind of legal process, and that agreement does say 6 feet. And so we would have to officially reopening bargaining. And, right now, frankly, as the numbers are really skyrocketing, doesn't seem like a wise time to start that session this week. But I hear you, and we've been talking about this in an ongoing way.
Okay, thank you. Next comment.
Yep, the next person will be Mary Mulkeen.
Okay, go ahead, Mary.
Sorry, I'm unmuted her by accident. Mary, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. I'm Mary Mulkeen, 130 Washington. Thank you, Superintendent Park, school committee members. Appreciate your work. Just want to share some personal experience. My own children saying, why is school so easy? All we get is busy work. Why don't they take attendance on Wednesdays? My eyes hurt. When can we go back to school? Sit so long. I got kicked out of Zoom again. No, we don't have any homework. So these are just some comments that we've been dealing with over the past many months, and it's really upsetting.
I think we lost you.
Looks like they've dropped out of the Zoom call. So
Okay.
Mary, if you rejoin, you can raise your hand again. We'll bump you back up. So the next person to speak will be Quinn Morrison. Quinn, you should be able to
Hi,
speak.
it's Heather Morrison. That's my son. He's been using my
Okay.
Zoom. 74 Magnolia Drive. I think you all know who I am. So I have no doubt that you are all working very hard and the administrators are working very hard. But in person would actually, I think, be less work for everybody. So I think we just need to work more smartly. Both the MOU that you have with the unions and the DESE reopening plan indicate, and I quote, that you will continually review the public health landscape and be prepared to transition to a different model if needed. That time is now. A vaccine is here. Testing is available. We know more about COVID, including the recent study that was just published in Pediatrics that showed that within school transmission is rare and that they saw 0 student to teacher transmission. The CDC published a report today saying that schools should be the first to open and the last to close. They are the experts. The state is on track to get the teachers vaccinated in February. They're opening super sites. We're not going to need to have to even rely on local clinics like you were mentioning. The teachers have been deemed essential. So once they get vaccinated, they need to go back to work. Once the teachers have the opportunity to receive the vaccine, there's no longer a reason to not have in-person school. So we need to start planning now. You've said that it'll take at least 6 weeks to get back in person. So there needs, at the next meeting, there should be a plan at that February meeting that you've now delayed a week for how we can go back in March or early April, because they'll be vaccinated. There's no reason not to go back. If you're not prepared to bring the students back this year, I would again ask you how you are going to fix the problems that have been created over the last year. I would also ask, have you started talking to the staff about a return to school? It seems like there haven't been conversations with teachers about coming back, that they're going to need to come back. Testing is coming, vaccines are coming. You need to start that education now. I just went through this with my own school. We've basically spent the last month informing our teachers about vaccines, the safety of them, and how great they're going to be. And we just had our first clinic today, which was amazing. So you need to get people prepared now. We can't wait until the day the state says you get the vaccines tomorrow, because unfortunately that's how it works. They give you just about no notice. I'd like to say in closing that, like many of the other parents have said, the kids are not okay. The harm of the lack of in-person education is far greater than the risk of COVID for these children. When my children's teacher recently asked them, what is good about remote? They declared nothing. The teacher persisted and said, oh, come on, there has to be something. And they continued. Nothing is good about remote. The initial plan that was made in the summer is no longer relevant. We know more about COVID. Schools are safe. We have testing. We have vaccines coming. They're over 95% effective. We should have a plan to go back this year. I don't understand why public schools don't want to educate their kids when private schools and parochial schools are open and providing this education. Parents don't care if the teacher changes or the schedule changes. We just want to.
I'm gonna stop you now, and I'm also gonna just say this. Public schools do care about educating their kids. And I don't know what other districts are doing, but this administration, these teachers, this community cares very much about educating the kids in our community. We are doing the best to keep everybody safe. Nobody asked for this pandemic. We are in very difficult times. We've heard your views. We understand that you want the kids back in school. We all want the kids back in school, but we would be remiss in our obligation to our teachers and to our families if we don't consider the safety issues. We don't have transmission in our schools right now because our kids are 6 feet apart and because we're wearing masks. We are doing the right thing. We want to get back to school more than anything. We have heard your views. We have heard the views of so many of, I know there is a group that is very, very passionate about getting kids back to school. We've heard from you over the last several months. We understand your point. We have an incredibly bright administration here. We have incredibly bright medical advisors. We are not sticking our heads in the sand. We are looking at every possibility to get our kids back. So please don't come to this meeting and tell us that we don't want to educate our kids here in the public district. We're going to move on to the next person.
The next person will be Carrie Capodilupo.
Go ahead, Carrie.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I feel like Superintendent Parks and the school committee members, you're consistently highlighting grades K through 3 and middle school and high school with respect to the challenges or small wins or how you're accommodating these grades. And I've heard little to nothing specifically about 4th and 5th grade. And I feel like these grades are being lost in the shuffle. You know, on surveys, they are lumped in with the elementary school results. And clearly the experiences of K through 3 families is vastly different than grade 4 and 5 families. So obviously the percentage on these surveys are a bit skewed. To be honest, I'm a little shocked that we aren't considering 9-year-olds, as in the case of my 4th grader, too young to effectively learn online, and why we haven't come up with a plan to get these younger students back in the door full time yet, coming up on almost a year now. In my own experience, which I know isn't reflective of the entire community, but is reflective of me and some of the community, my 4th grader has 3 other students in his in-person cohort, 3. So it is honestly beyond me why these kids can't be in the classroom full time. It seems like an easy decision if our goal is to get in as many bodies back full time as possible who want to be there. I really just want to draw attention to our 4th and 5th graders who are still elementary school little learners and should be given a chance to get as much in-person time as possible, being, as I said, little learners. Logistically not as complicated for you as the middle and high school with respect to changing classes, etc. So is it something that can be explored in a similar fashion to how grades 2 and 3 were explored and changed and work well, which also from my own experience, because I also have a 2nd grader. So I just want to pose that question, draw our attention to 4th and 5th, which I think I know isn't on the forefront of everyone's mind, or at least doesn't seem to be in these conversations. Thank you.
They are on my mind, Carrie. And so I do hear you, and you're right that if you disaggregate the data, the experience of the 4th and 5th graders, well, the parent survey for 4th and 5th grade parents was more similar to middle school than it was to K to 3. I agree with that assessment.
The next person to be unmuted, not sure to whom this is either Teddy McGowan or Ed McGowan. So you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hey guys, this is Ed McGowan, 20 Currier Farm Road. I've got 4 kids, 1 in high school, 1 in middle, and 2 in Downey. So I get to see a little bit of everything here. First, I want to just thank everybody. I know, look, we're all on the same team. This is hard on everybody. And we all know we want nothing but the best for the kids. So what I want to do tonight is just offer a couple suggestions and just highlight an area that I'd like to see us focus on in the near term. And just kind of set the stage, just as background, I'm a CFO of one of the largest public companies in Massachusetts. We've got about 8,000 employees in 30 countries. And we face this challenge of going in and saying, okay, well, how are we going to deal with this issue? And the first thing we did was said, it's all about communicating, and people really have a hard time dealing with uncertainty. Develop a plan, communicate that plan, tell people what we're going to measure, how we're going to measure it, and what does that mean, and communicate often. And one of the things that I'd like to see us do a bit more is communicate with a little bit more of a positive, upbeat message. When I talk to my kids, they feel like there's no hope, there's no end, there's no way we're getting back to school. So surveying is another thing that we do. We get information from people and we adapt, right? We try to figure out, okay, what's not working and how can we adapt our plan and deal with issues that people are having. We eliminate the we can'ts. It's very easy to say we can't in Colorado and say, well, that's too hard to do. Well, what is a way that we can adapt and make a plan? So for example, let me translate this into the school. There are certain triggers that will be happening as we go. Teachers will be vaccinated. When teachers vaccinate, how does that change our plan? What incremental step can be made? When the weather gets warmer, what can we do taking advantage of outside? We've got to give these kids some hope and understanding that there is an end in sight. And the message has to be very positive. Even if we sent out a message that said, here is the plan to reopen. We have a plan for a plan. Right now, the kids are just struggling with there's no end in sight. One of the biggest issues that I worry about and something I think we can do now is the social aspects. What are some things that we can do now to get the kids together in informal groups, getting them communicating? The biggest feedback that I'm getting, especially from my older kids in middle school and high school, is that they're not talking to one another. They're not making new friends. Take advantage of things. As the weather gets warmer, can we just start doing some activities outside? Can we do things virtually online, competitions? I don't know. I'm not an expert in this area. I look to you guys to do that. And finally, I would encourage you, I think we have a unique opportunity here. We're in a world that's completely divided. We can't agree on anything, but I think this challenge here, I think 100% of the people in this town would agree we have to do better, we want to do better. And let's take advantage of some of the people in the community and ask for help. We've got brilliant people in this community, doctors, lawyers, professionals that we're willing to offer help. Let us know what some of those obstacles are. If we need to raise money, if we need to vote in a certain way or vote somebody out, whatever it is, let us know, communicate. Let us
Okay, Ed, I'm sorry, I have to cut you off there so we can get to our next person, but we appreciate your comments. Thank you.
The next person is Mary Kate Ferreira. Mary Kate, you should be able to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, it's Mary Kate Ferreira. I'm at 26 Forest Road. Reiterating what some people have said about the uncertainty and not being aware of exactly what the plan is. My personal situation is that I do have a 4th grader, you know, like the previous speaker said, a little learner who is still only in 2 days a week of school. He's also on an IEP. He's not able to handle his remote learning independently. So to not know what the plan is for those students, I don't know if people are aware of how many kids on IEPs are still only in school 2 days a week. And that's where I feel like those Wednesdays could be very helpful for those students. And I understand the reprieve that you mentioned for the teachers. As a former educator, I cannot imagine what it must be like to teach under these circumstances, but that reprieve is coming at the expense of the students who are really struggling with only going into school 2 days a week. So my question is, what is the plan for the students on IEPs?
Okay. The next person will be Jackie K once again.
Hello, this is Jackie Keaveney again at 22 Redwood Road. I had a few other questions that I wanted to ask, and I was cut off earlier. I don't think my question was rude in any way. So I
No,
would
you
just
weren't.
like to
I thought you
continue.
were through. I'm sorry about that. Go ahead.
Yes, and this wasn't something I was going to bring up, but as you were talking to some of the other parents, I would just like you to be aware that when parents are passionate and asking questions, it's not a personal attack on the school committee or the teachers, but when you are thanking people, also keep in mind that parents are home and they're exhausted. They're acting as the teachers. They're dealing with the social and emotional situations at home with the kids. And then they're working through the night on their jobs that they weren't able to get through during the day. And people's emotions are high. And when we call, we're passionate about our kids because, as someone else called and said, you're only as happy as your happiest kid, and the kids are not happy. So please keep that in mind when people call. It's not a battle. We want to work together, but it's very hard if we feel cut off when we call to ask questions. And we are part of this community. We put forth a lot, just like the teachers, and it would be nice to acknowledge that. And that being said, I think we should acknowledge the kids and thank them because they've given up so much in this situation. And school is about them, and I feel like we're never talking about them or how much they've let go of their childhood for all of this, basically for adults, for the safety of adults.
Jackie, I
That
think
being
that
said,
I just want to say that I think we all agree that the kids are our most precious commodity. And we, over the months, for sure, we are so appreciative of what parents are doing. And I think we've talked for a long time or over many meetings about the importance of partnership here. And we realize that parents are, and we're all parents. Well, many of us are parents here. I think we all are. And we understand particularly, it sounds like you're a working parent, and it's extremely difficult for working parents balancing jobs and acting as teachers at home. So make no mistake that we agree with you wholeheartedly on that. Did you have another question?
I did.
Go ahead.
My question was about considering some more support for the kids socially in school. I know I can speak at least for the middle school. A lot of those kids don't know each other. The 6th grade is stuck in the same classroom. They don't know their whole grade. The 7th grade currently missed out on a whole year. I don't know about the 8th grade, but just talking to a few kids, little things like extending their break time when they're able to talk to other students would give them more time to get to know people. The kids feel like they don't have friends. And I know you have support in place, but they're not going to advocate for themselves or feel like, not every one of them is going to go and seek help and say, I don't have friends or I'm feeling lonely. I think we've got to look at some different ways to address these issues and help these kids navigate this. I don't know much about the high school. The elementary school for the 4th and 5th graders, most of those kids know each other, but there's got to be different outside the box ways we can let these kids, taking away a little bit of class time to help them feel like they're supported or they've met someone new is more important than, a few more minutes of learning.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you.
Appreciate your comments.
The last person will be Amy Thiamont once more.
Hi, sorry, it's probably going to be repetitive. Another mom of a 4th grader. And similar to what I heard Tina Collins say it, and Carrie and Jackie as well, that I do think my son used to have like a love of going to school and learning and seeing his friends. And now when Thursday rolls around, he's like, oh, do I have to go to school? So it's really just another anecdote. And I wanted to know, everyone talks about the mental health of the middle schoolers and high schoolers, which is of course is important. But even kids as young as like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, also, they can't articulate it as well, but they also are getting depressed. Again, they can't articulate it as well as maybe some of the older kids, but it still is happening. So, you know, I just want to know what's being addressed for the mental health. I appreciate the social activities, but really the mental health of those kids, besides your own, you know, the own parents or families' resources. That's all.
Okay. Thank
Okay.
you, Amy.
And at this time, I see no one else with their hand raised.
Okay. Thanks for your help, Connor.
Always happy to help.
Okay. All right, folks, we're coming to the final bend of the meeting here with the action items. So let's start with the allocation of funds for the periodic staff COVID testing. You're on mute, Emily.
So it's my hope that the committee tonight would authorize us to reallocate the funds in the way that Lemma described. And we talked about a potential cost of $90,000. I want to emphasize, based on some of the comments during public comment, that it is a per person cost, and that's based on full participation. So I don't think that's me. The cost would decrease if there were lower participation. We obviously would, like to encourage participation. And secondly, as I think maybe I didn't make this clear, that rather than, our intention would be rather than contract with Miramis through April vacation, that we would start with a smaller increment in the event that the state program becomes available and is less expensive, and is a way to continue the staff testing program, that we would pivot to that.
Okay. So can I get a motion at this point
Make
to
a motion.
allow for the reallocation of funds? Did I hear that?
Yeah, I'll make a motion.
Okay. Thanks, May. Can I get a second?
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion on this, people? No further discussion? Okay, let's take a vote. Charlie, this is for the allocation of funds? Reallocation of funds for purposes of testing. Can I get a vote from you?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Tony?
Yay.
Okay. Maya?
Yes.
Amanda?
Yes.
And I am a yes. It's unanimous. That motion carries. All right, let's go to the approval of the minutes. Can we go to the December 10th, 2020 minutes? Can I get a motion to approve, please?
So moved.
Second.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion on these minutes?
Yeah, I'd like to make an amendment
Okay.
to page 5, where we talk about the metrics. I would just like to add a line that criteria will change potentially with vaccinations. That was a line we had that was approved by the medical advisory committee, and I just want to add that line.
Okay. Thank you, Tony. So we will change those minutes accordingly. Do we want to wait and vote, or do you want to go ahead and take the vote now, knowing that we'll have that amendment?
I'm fine, yeah, with that amendment.
Okay, all right. So let's take a vote. Amanda, you good with that amendment?
Yeah.
Okay. Charlie?
Yes.
Maya?
Yep.
And Tony, you said you're fine.
Yes.
I'm in agreement. So those, the motion carries. Those minutes are approved with that caveat. December 14th minutes. Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion on these minutes? Okay, let's take the vote. Amanda?
Yep.
Maya?
Yep.
Charlie?
Yes.
Tony?
Yes.
I am a yes. It's unanimous. Those minutes are approved. Go to the December 15th minutes. Can I get a motion to approve, please?
So moved.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion on these minutes?
Yeah, I'd like to have again two additions. On
Okay,
page 2 and on page, I can send these to Kendra, but on page 2 and I think it's page 4, there's a timeline outlined around some of the events with the school building. I think Maya mentioned that we should just put in there these times are caveat, subject to change, as we have, subject to change.
okay.
Guess we add that.
Sure. Those minutes actually go to John now.
Oh, okay.
But he's got, I'm sure he's got that. We've taken note of the change. And with those changes, let's take a motion, a vote to approve the December 15th minutes. Amanda?
Yeah.
Okay, Maya?
Yes.
Charlie? Did I hear from? Okay, and Tony?
Yes.
And I'm in agreement as well. So that motion carries. Those minutes are approved. And we move on to new business. Anybody have any? No? Seeing none? How about a motion to adjourn? How about a second?
Second.
How about a third? No, just kidding. Okay, Tony, are you good to go?
Yes.
All right, Charlie, you?
Yes. Yes.
All right, Maya?
Yes.
Yes, Amanda?
Yes.
I'm ready to go. That's a wrap, people. Thank you for everything.
Thank
Have a
you.
good night.
Good night.
Thank you.